Okay, so I had to cut the Greek off early last time, which I regret to inform everyone, but we get to pick right back up, arguably where we left off, and we also have Daniel Sala.
Hello.
So I have stuff that the Greek and I can pick up on, but you wanted to make mention of a couple interesting points.
Well, yeah, I did listen to your previous show, and it caught my attention a few certain things that he hadn't brought up before, the Greek, and I had to, pounce on them. Namely, one of them was the idea that, well, we discussed this in private, but since we're, going for fresh intel, might as well bring it up, the idea that we all know that theory has been disproven, and whatever you see through the electron microscope is usually an artifact, and the simulation of the culture medium result in the same thing whether you use a sample or not, and all these things. But he mentioned that the pandemics are real. He gave the example of smallpox, and I was wondering if you can elaborate on what's the real mechanism of how pandemics work.
Okay, great. Environment. Where the body starts and where it ends is actually the environment that's around you. For example, I brought up, if you recall, seasonal eating. Many people get what's called the common cold when there are seasonal changes. There's also a cold that happens when it goes, not only people are used to getting the cold, let's say, when it goes from warm weather to cold weather, but there are also people that come down with certain discomforts and what they call illnesses when it goes from winter to summer. For example, very often in many parts of the world, especially in northern latitudes, there's something called the rotting season. I would consider it a fifth season. You know how we have the 4 seasons, this would be a 5th season. This is determined very simply by, you'll notice that certain times of the year, depending on where you are on the earth, the milk doesn't stay as fresh, or things don't stay as fresh. They spoil much quicker. If you have a wound, it takes much longer to heal. And the northern latitudes above 30 or 40, let's say, it happens when you transition from winter to summer. On the more equatorial, it's from summer to winter. That's just an example. And it has nothing to do with temperature of the refrigerator or temperature. It has to do with a seasonal change, which is an energetic change. I think we brought up, if you look at the cross-section of lung tissue, intestinal tissue, stomach tissue, you'll notice that there's nothing that goes through those tissues. They're completely sealed.
We did briefly cover that.
Yes. So the process of induction, which is very similar to in electronics or electrical engineering, the process of a transformer coil, where you have you take one voltage and you step it down or step it up when you have a wound coil next to another coil. And they cannot still explain how it works, but they do know it does. So if we call it induction, and we look at the term, and it's typically used as a social term, but typically used as an engineering term, it's fairly accurate. So things affect each other by proximity, okay? Like, for example, wireless, the idea of wireless. What happens with the body, if you want to just take it to a quick end, is you have perturbations, which is disturbances. Things have templates and predetermined outcomes, believe it or not, in nature. And when those predetermined outcomes are disturbed or changed through perturbances or disturbances, you have disease. Very similar to, like, if you're driving a car up a hill and the air becomes too thin, it doesn't run very well because the air to fuel gas mixture starts to go off, let's say, right? So the next concept for illness is the human body is constantly radiating energy. Let's just not call it energy, because when you define it energy, it's ability to do work and other things. But we have a field and an atmosphere around us, and the quality of that atmosphere either promotes wellness or disease. So that is the basis, the basic foundation. It is a non-physical, in other words, when I said, if I recall, the Revolutionary War did not start in America until there was a smallpox pandemic, was what I brought up. Typically, they wait for pandemics. That's why, for example, what they call the Spanish flu did not start in Spain. It's very well known. It started in Kansas. It was started by the medical community and the political community, right? It was known as the American Army flu, and the only reason they called it the Spanish flu is because it was first acknowledged when the Americans landed in Spain. So you'll notice that whenever you see a spread of disease like this, it's a geopolitical ploy to go into war. The Black Plague was also very similar. It was started by the Asians going back and retaliating against the Europeans. I think I have described in private how these things are done. I don't think it's good to describe them publicly, but what I want to just maybe add, I'm kind of all over the place here because it's a big topic, and I know people don't have the basis and the foundation of it, so hopefully being more roundabout is, in general, at least to get them away from the theory, is best. But I don't think it's best to talk about how these things are really done. For example, people still have the misunderstanding that there's some laboratory that has these agents in a petri dish and somehow spreads them to the population. That will never happen. You can attempt to do something like that, and you might, quote unquote, infect maybe a dozen or so people, but it won't spread. You see, because there's a big myth about that. You know, let's say something getting out of a lab and spreading worldwide. That is a myth. That is just as big of a myth as 19 Arab hijackers with box cutters vaporized the World Trade Center, right?
I think it's a safe assumption to say that it happens non-physically and through EM frequency, right? Because
yes,
and that part of it is also just Mother Nature. For example, when you put a beaker of water with DNA in one corner of the room and another one with nucleic acids, aka the ingredients of DNA, in another beaker of the room, and then you shine a UV light on the one with DNA, the sequences in the beaker with DNA will automatically form in the other one.
Yes.
So that's a glimpse of how it works, I guess. What would you say is the proportion between the ones that are intentional and the ones that are naturally occurring?
But if you actually look at it from a very high vantage point, there's nothing natural. It's all under control. There are systems in place. Like, for example, the self-driving cars, are they naturally driving? They might seem like they are, but they're not. There's a pre-program in there, right? And devices and sensors. That's one thing, that everything is in reverse. In other words, what we think we're actually developing technology, meaning we, the human collective, is we're not really developing anything. We're just discovering and rediscovering methodologies.
Right.
Yeah. Now, one more thing about the idea of contagions and all that is, and you said EM, it's actually beyond current measurable frequencies, because the way that frequencies are measured, let's say, if you were to say the frequency, I would say it's more Planck, Max Planck, in other words, these are frequencies that are beyond measurement. There are ways to measure them, but not with current devices, because all of the current devices are based on pressure. All of your frequency measuring devices use sensors and transducers that rely on a certain kind of pressure to activate them to create an analog readout for the observer or the scientist. These types of frequencies do not work that way. They work on a scale that is not pressure-based. In other words, you might say vacuum-based, but not vacuum as people would consider a simple vacuum, but a biological vacuum, which is an oscillating vacuum. Like people talk about nitrogen, for example. Nitrogen is a pulsing gas. I can prove it, right? Also, you have to go back to a very simple methodology that the ancients used of hydrogen. We consider hydrogen to be the first element on the periodic table, but the word hydro means water and gen means to generate or create. So literally, that is a gas that it has to do a lot with water. So just like you mentioned, there are many experiments where even beyond putting the DNA replication in one room, it's actually happened across the world, where they have distilled water across the world and they send a certain frequency, and within 8 hours, the same DNA appears in distilled water. Okay.
Through sound?
Through electromagnetic frequencies used as a carrier wave, right?
Yeah.
So one thing you have to understand is, like, for example, in ancient texts, they talk about, especially the biblical texts, when something is deemed spiritually clean or unclean. Like, for example, if someone unclean touches something that is inanimate, then that inanimate object now takes on that status of being unclean. We might visit it as something like, for example, if someone, quote unquote, is diseased, lays in a bed or touches something and you touch it, then you become sick. There is a very strong truth to that, by the way, that it is conducted that way, but it's done through the actual hydrogen. But again, if I say hydrogen and your mind goes to the first thing in the periodic table, you miss the point, even in the name. Like here's, for example, let me just give something because everything ties in together. The concept of alchemy, one of the biggest disappointments on the internet for me is researching alchemy. If I told you almost 100% or 99.9999% of all the ideology and philosophy about what is alchemy on the internet is false, it would be hard to believe. But let me explain. Once the alchemist or the person working with spiritual transformation, let's say, of the world, that's really what it is, because alchemy is not just material, but it's social as well. The concept of the good wizard or the good witch versus the bad wizard or the bad witch is a social thing based on the characters of those two polarized, but it's actually alchemic as well. Okay, so for example, you hear a lot about lead being turned into gold. And here, I'll give a little secret on how that's done, because that's the difficult way to do it. You need a very high spiritual development to do that. But the way that lead is turned into gold is by having lead, listen very carefully, is by having lead release hydrogen. Because if you look at mathematically on the periodic table, if the lead releases one proton and one electron, it becomes electrically on the periodic table gold. Okay, so people are looking, well, how do they have done this in high energy nuclear reactions, by the way. When they use lead shielding, they've come back after months of running high energy nuclear reactions and find it's coated with gold. But really what's happening is if we say hydrogen is just one electron, one proton, whatever, we miss the point. So the point here is, how do you get a hunk of lead or big mass of lead to release hydrogen? Because once you get the lead to release hydrogen as a gas or a liquid, you will end up with gold. And I just gave a very big secret on how it's done. Stop looking at it as electrons and protons and look at everything in hydrogen. Like, for example, there's a lithium shortage, they say, or it's a major industrial proponent for the way the future is going with power storage, right, with lithium batteries. Why not take hydrogen and helium, which are more commonly found, and combine them to make lithium? Why not do that? For example, petroleum. This is what got Germany in trouble in World War I. It's a hydrocarbon. Why not take CO2 gas, which is readily produced and readily available, and water, and make hydrocarbons? And by the way, there's plenty of companies and laboratories online you could look up making petroleum from water and CO2 gas. There's a process. There's one process called Towns gas, which was done 150 years ago. And this goes on and on. Yes, you do need catalysts. You do need a catalyst. For an example of a catalyst would be vegetable shortening that's used for cooking, Crisco or whatever, right? It's a vegetable oil, but it looks like butter or margarine. That's water and oil mixed together. Now, you can mix water and oil all you want, all day long, all week long, all year long. It will not turn into a buttery consistency. But if you take the mixture under a slight vacuum and you run it over very high purity nickel beads, it will form into this buttery margarine shortening condition. Now, if you test it, you'll say, the typical chemist will say, well, that's because the nickel is going in there. No, you'll test it. There is absence of nickel. There is no nickel in the material. It's just a catalyst. So the other part of understanding is a catalyst. And everything I just said ties back to how the human body is in a state of health or a state of disease or a pandemic is spread. I know it might sound cryptic, but I'm laying down the basic foundation. Instead of teaching young children the alphabet, don't they have little wooden blocks and things to play with? And then right, you see? So these are the little alphabet blocks of how, quote unquote, disease and the disabling of the social condition is what I call it, right? Because people can't be social if they're dropping dead, right?
Yeah, I think the difference between alchemy and chemistry is that chemistry only studies dead things. And even if you wanted to instruct people about alchemy, they just wouldn't be ready for it, both in terms of practice, but also they would just reject it. But apparently the stronger ones, there's a hierarchy, and you have the plant and then animal and then the metal. kingdom that can provide you all these essences and elixirs. But even then, when it comes to the most advanced part of alchemy, like getting the elixir of life that basically gives you immortality, that one can actually be extracted from any mineral, any living being, or anything in existence. Is just a matter of skill. And then I heard that the study of alchemy, if you master it, it's always going to essentially be oriented beneficially, because it has been attempted to be appropriated by, more nefarious entities, but
Yes.
they only partially succeeded, never really grasped it.
Yes, there's a fellow called Ibrahim Karim. He does biogeometry by basically making a squiggle or a line on a technological device that's putting out bad energy into the room will change it, for example. And having a discussion with him, and he said this publicly on his own, is that every time someone comes up with a beneficial methodology, regardless if it's using symbols or alchemy or concepts, immediately it's grasped, and there are 300 people versus one that try to use it for bad reasons, right? Look at pharmaceutical companies. People think they're pharmaceutical and medicine, but they're not classified as such. They're classified as chemical companies. And the biggest business that chemical companies have, just like any business, is you want military contracts, right? And what does the military use the chemicals for? Right? So it all works the same way. I wanted to just for some people listening, they might think because I brought up alchemy, it's a deflection from your original question. But the original question was the contact or the contagion theory. One thing I just want to say is also very, very important, which I've repeated myself over the past more than 2 decades, but at least a decade on the internet, is no matter what field you look at, there's over 15,000 different fields in industry and art that people can look at in the Thomas catalog, which is an industrial catalog. Every one of those is wide open, completely wide open. In other words, when you look at all of what academia is putting in front of you, I call it grunt work. It's no more than going to the biggest construction site in the world and seeing ditch diggers. Ditches have to be dug. They have done nothing more than dig ditches. They have not elaborated or developed anything at all. So any field anyone wants to explore, and you look at a body of knowledge that looks complicated and all that, it's done that way to deflect you. All of the fields are completely wide open. Every single field. Doesn't matter what it is. That's why we have the secret technologies and secret societies, right? They're taking advantage of what can be developed, and basically the trash or the rubbish is given to the public. So again, just to go back to the idea of anatomy, because if we're talking about disease and pandemics, we have to look at of what. In the anatomy, we'll notice that the human body or a plant or an animal, nothing ever goes through from the exterior environment into the body, passing through by absorption or osmosis or anything like that physically. It's all by induction. You have the lungs and bladder and things like that, kidneys, which are cul-de-sacs where something goes in and then back comes out the same way it went in, but nothing penetrates or is ever absorbed. So once this is understood, and people hearing my voice, because I think I might be the only one insisting on this, by the way, that nothing ever goes in or comes out of the body directly. Once people hear this and meditate on it, whether it's for an hour, a week, or a year, they can pick up from what I just said and say, then what is the concept of nutrition? What is the concept of disease? What is the concept of growth? How does it work? You see?
Yeah.
My whole goal, is to inspire, is to give out, because I've been sitting on these things, by the way, for a very long time, most of my life, and I keep looking at other people producing a simple result, and it's kind of embarrassing to not see things broken down in such a simple way, because I'm very private. I'm not a good speaker. I'm not the most intelligent person or whatever, but it's kind of embarrassing that these points are not being made by other humans.
Yeah, they're very slowly starting to eke their way. They admitted to themselves that every time they're asked, the mainstream, they admit to not being able to see an isolated in the fluid of any sick person. And a lady has taken upon herself to send this to every major medical institution in the world. And they all either dismiss or just admit to the fact that they don't have it. But you also mentioned that you have a certain pet peeve with a few terms, like I think quantum mechanics being one of them, and the principle of uncertainty, how it's all at random.
There is no. It might seem random. For example, two nations going to war, when the frontline infantry of one moves on the other, they might look very random, but I'm assuring you that it was very well planned before. The same if you watch, let's say, an American football game. You'll see a line of scrimmage, they blow the whistle, the game starts, and they're running across the field. It looks very random, but I assure you it's been planned very, very closely before it started.
And another one is the concept of space-time, that matter can curve space.
That's about as ridiculous as anything else we've heard that the public talks about. Now, picking on these things, let me just say almost everything that you hear everyone talk about is a form of propaganda or psyop, right? But it's so big that people don't see it. Just for example, if everything was hot, there's no hot because there's no contrast. So if everyone is a criminal, there's no criminal, right? If everyone is good, because there's nothing to say he's good or he's bad. Okay, so what's happening is when you put out stuff like quantum and time space and all that, by the way, which I use as a litmus test when I listen to people speak about their experiences or science, when the moment I hear that, that's a major red flag that this person has been very heavily propagandized. Number one, innocent, or number two is a shill, or number three is just people want to hear this person speak for some reason where they should be using their breath to cool their porridge instead. But anyway, yeah, these are all concepts. Let's just go specifically space-time, because if I just sound like I'm knocking it and not giving a reason, whenever you say something, you have to give the how and why. Space, even Tesla said this, has no attributes. That's why it's called space. Nothing has no attributes. Zero has no attributes. So the space is merely the points that are described as such for communication purposes. So there is no space. In other words, the space between objects defined as something is ridiculous. It has no attributes. It's the objects around it and what they emanate that define the situation. Time is the same. There is no time. If there is no motion, there is no time. What we consider time, especially I poke fun at it, calling the mechanical clock the wind-up toy known as the clock, or the Pope's work schedule, or no matter what form of time convention you use in seconds or whatever, because each culture had their own way of keeping time, is just a matter of recording events. So when you're communicating a memorialized event, something that happened or something that will happen, you're giving a measurement, a metric on how to perceive it. Right? Because if I say it happens in 5 million seconds, it's easier to say 6 months, right? Because you see, so we break these things down into different levels. But there is no time either. Time is merely the measurement of and recordation of events, right? So bending space-time is just about as ridiculous as anything else that you hear, or manipulating space-time. And the same with time travel. You're never traveling in time past or the future. You're traveling to a past event or a future event, and it's not done by time. It's done by each event having its own, let's say, frequency in existence. And the moment you're able to measure it, you reproduce it, and then you somehow the reality we're living in will reproduce it enough that you will actually be there.
Right. And would you agree that the most maybe overlooked aspect, even more than electromagnetism, is the rotation of all these particles, the subatomic particles, because even the electrons spin, and if you were to adjust to account for that, then you could actually observe it with the right apparatus, and then it would make sense that this absorption caused by the rotation of everything is what also causes the gravity and so on, and that also is the mechanism behind astrology and astronomy.
Yes, well, the astronomy and astrology are reversed the definitions, by the way. Astronomos means knowledge of the stars, and astrology means the laws of the stars. So they should be reversed, you see, because the astrologers never get into this planet being in this house when it's made of gas and has this or that quality to it. You see, Astrology is knowledge, and nomos, astronomy, is the laws. So when someone is looking at astrology or an astrologist, they're really an astronomer, and vice versa. Just like the words soul and spirit have been reversed, right? But in terms of gravity, there is no gravity either. The gravity is a resultant of the ether. The ether, okay, everything in nature, even the hardness of materials, is pressure differential. In other words, something that has more pressure will resist something of less pressure, and something that has more pressure will want to go towards something of less pressure. So the reason you have the illusion of what they call gravity, which is just a name, is that the Earth represents a sink, like something that falls into something else, of ether. So, and when you understand the potentials are reversed, where the ether goes from low to high potential, the Earth represents a high potential ethereal zone, as many of the planets, actually all of the planets do. And the low potential ether is rushing towards it. And the ethereal component in matter is being dragged along with it. Very simple. The electron and the neutron and the atom is a fallacy. It is just a communication. For example, the ether expressing itself in material form as material is the same as, let's say you have a fan, an electric, a wind air fan on your desk, and it's off, and it has, let's say, 10 blades on it. You can put your hand through that fan anywhere, and you have a lot of quote unquote space, and you can move safely through it, correct? Yeah. What happens when you plug that fan on and it's spinning at 1500 RPM? Those 10 blades start spinning, and that zone appears to be solid. Anything you throw within that zone that the blades pass through appears to be solid. The same with a wheel on a bicycle or anything that's rotating. And the faster that it rotates, the more solid it appears to be. So if you're moving at the same speed as that fan, you could probably negotiate some kind of traversal through that. Or if you stop the fan from moving, you can negotiate a traversal through the fan, like as if when it was not plugged in. And that's simply the condition of matter. What they're calling the electron potential, which is electrons in science is EV, right? Electron volts usually. That is when they have a resistive element. In other words, when the material is put under certain pressure, it will create some discharge. In other words, once the mechanical pressure or mechanical movement is introduced, there is a charging sequence that happens and then a discharge. And that discharge or resistance, altered condition, is what they're calling an electron.
Right.
The same as blood pressure. The doctor straps the medical technician, calling them a doctor is more than they deserve because they're not. They strap a cuff on your arm and pressurize it to stop the natural blood flow and then tell you have a certain condition called blood pressure, when in fact, everything that's moving inside the body is under a slight vacuum. In other words, less than external pressure. Otherwise, all the liquid would be at your feet and nothing at your head unless you had a 1200 horsepower pump in your chest, moving it through 0.3 millimeter capillaries. See, so like before what happened the past 2 years, they already had scammed there's 20 or 30 million people that insist on taking blood pressure medication and other things like that. They already had scammed that many people. So why not go to the bill, scam everybody, keep scamming, right? So most of the medical conditions, if not all of them, are medical fiction. Most of them, those diseases do not exist, by the way. And the major ones do not exist either, right?
Yeah, there
I
are
hope
no
this is
specific
understood. Yeah.
diseases. But also about the ether, there must be different levels, I would think, also because just how light behaves differently depending on where it is in the universe. And of course, it's the background on which matter manifests, including the background of the spin and everything. But I would guess that it has different levels, right? Because of how, for example, it's also misinterpreted the Big Bang theory that the universe is expanding because of their interpretation of redshifts. They think that it's going away from you, whereas all that redshift is well, it's not linear. It's tired light.
Yes.
It's between
That's been
galaxies.
disproven. The Doppler theory of the red and blue shift has been disproven already because it never took into account on the emissivity of the bodies they were measuring and the emissivity of the material. And also their instruments were very biased and crude. Yeah. just like they came up with water being H2O, which it's not.
Yeah. And about the gravity, I still would like to elucidate this because there are so many opinions about what exactly keeps you upright in hollow Earth, assuming you by now you have been clued into the
Sure.
idea that the Earth is hollow. So the conventional theory, and the one that you hear in the science, the very few books about it that are scientific, and the most of the literature, at least 3 books that I found, say that respect the shell theorem, which says that the center point of the planet is basically 0 gravity, and that you're being kept upright by the mantle on either side, which means that you're at 0 gravity in the middle of the mantle.
You don't have to be there. 0 gravity. Again, if we let's say gravity is a resultant of a motion of the ether, that resultant of the motion is what we call gravity as a thing. Now, there's something that is not really much discussed. It's done in music. It's called coherence, right? So when something is coherent, in other words, there's a certain amount of harmony that is conducive to growth in life. Direction doesn't matter as much, you see. Like, for example, if we're on a big ball spinning in space, why is it that people in Australia aren't falling off and the people in Australia saying why the people up north are not falling off, right? Because there's a coherence there. There's a big thing about the flat Earth and the round Earth, and I say it's both, depending on what you're doing. And what you're doing, if it's coherent with what you're observing and your result, then you're good to go, you see. That's why, let me give another example. I was speaking with someone, an SSP person, and we wanted to bring up gravity. They didn't want to hear what I had to say, of course. They already had their mindset. But I asked, what about the drive systems? How do you get these ships and vehicles to move? I said, it's plasma engines. And I said, really? If you have a device that's making plasma, well, that's what it's doing. It's making plasma. It's not making anti-gravity. If your engine is making plasma, you're making plasma. You're not making the effect. You see, so it's very difficult to communicate this, right, to many people or to the public at large, or even in a private discussion. In essence, there's a concept of shielding. You have to know how to shield and redirect in order to create that quote unquote levitation effect. And the best way to do it is through biology. For example, when you are walking around, like you said, walking around in the core and the mantle and all that, just being on the surface, for example, if you're walking around and you have levity, when you lose that levity, you feel sick and you have to lay down. The people that are very sick can't stand up. Okay, once you understand and study what is going on there between the structure, irrelevant of the structure of the body, let's say you have a skeleton or an exoskeleton, because an insect doesn't have an internal skeleton, for example. Once you understand the concept of levity, then you will be able to progress in the field of anti-gravity. The other thing is the rudimentary way to do it. Just like if someone couldn't stand up, you made crutches for them to assist them. The way you would develop a crutch to stand up or do anti-gravity is by rotating things, like, for example, gyroscopic motion. Back in the 1920s, it was banned. Anything that had to do with the effect of rotating devices was banned or just quietly eliminated. I dare anyone to find a scientific article anywhere in the world about the effect of gyroscopes.
There are in Russia.
What's that?
Russians actually acknowledge it.
Yes, but you won't find anything developing it beyond just basically from a toy, scale, right? And it has nothing to do with electricity, by the way, but you will use it just like if you made crutches for someone to stand, you can make them out of wood or metal or plastic. You don't have to use electricity. You can use magnetism. You can use, what is it called when a material dissolves into another? Material.
Oh, there's saturation point when it reaches its limit.
Yeah, when materials change, when you combine 2 materials to make a third material in a different state is another way to do this, by the way. Like, for example, if you study high-speed chemistry, known as explosives and things like that, those reactions don't make any sense when you really think about them. They make sense on paper, but when you study those reactions as well, you will get to the point of what we're talking about. But again, I don't think I answered your question directly, but when you go inside the Earth, it's not just a matter of penetrating from the surface and descending, let's say, in simple terms. It's a matter of gaining or creating or acquiring the coherence that is involved in existing there. There's a certain coherent body. Your body must be coherent with the conditions there.
Yeah, but there is also the fact that the mantle is not that different, so it still abides by many of our rules, although allegedly the hollow is completely next density. But the way I read between the lines in the most credible of these books, which is the Radu Cinamar series, I think that it automatically has to flip when you're in the hollow because of the different higher frequencies, and also it says that you have to be ready. Your frequency of vibration has to be at on par with where you're going, of course.
Sure.
Otherwise, you're just going to collapse and stuff. But because there was no mention of you turning upside down or anything, so I have to assume that you're still headed downwards when you're all the way through the mantle, which is so physical, and then it flips. But that's just my guess.
Well, it would be, okay, let's not think about it flipping upside down. Think about it, you're standing still and you get on a train that begins to move to a speed where you're going 100 kilometers per hour, and everything around you suddenly seems to be moving by you very quickly, but you're not moving, you see, but you're the one that's really moving, let's say, right?
Right.
And now here comes another train next to you that's also moving the same speed as you. And when you look at someone there, they can open the window and you can shake hands, and they don't seem like they're moving, right? To you, you see what I mean? The point of reference. Okay, that effect, that except for the point when you're standing still and the train is at zero and accelerating, at the point of acceleration, you will notice a difference. But once it reaches that stable speed, there's no difference. Now, you still feel like you're standing still. Ask anyone that's flown in an airplane at 500 miles per hour. They don't feel it. They don't feel the speed. Just like they say the Earth is spinning at whatever speed, you don't feel it. The same way, once you reorient yourself and there's coherence around the being that's experiencing this, you don't feel what position you're in. It doesn't matter unless you start looking directly at the exterior.
Right.
That is the same phenomenon. Sorry, I describe whether it's a round Earth or a flat Earth. If you're a farmer or an architect, the Earth is flat. Obviously, if you're a farmer, the sun goes around the Earth. It rises in the east and sets in the west. And you must understand that and use that to your benefit. Otherwise, you will not succeed in growing crops. You will starve. If you're an architect, you use a level and a plumb bob when you're putting up a building, meaning that the Earth is flat. And if you don't know that, the building will be crooked and everyone will laugh at you. Why are you using such poor practices, right? But if you're a land surveyor and you're using a theodolite and you're measuring to make a map, as you keep going, you're going to notice that none of your lines line up because of the curvature of the Earth. So you have to start compensating with steps and things like that that you see on borders, unless you follow a river or something. So if you're measuring the Earth, Lagrange points or Cartesian or whatever, you better understand the curvature. If you're an architect or a farmer, you better understand that it's flat. You see, the same thing with the hollow Earth.
Yeah. And what would you say is the best model or just approximation of a replacement for the space-time notion? And I can just give the example of the Andromedans, that they say that they use 9 mutually interchangeable coordinates, 6 of space and 3 of time, and they use time as though it were a dimension of space.
Yes, I would say that most of those coordinates are biological and consciousness-based, if you know what I mean by that.
That's a weird noise going on. Sorry. Okay.
Is that better? I think I had some interference there. Okay. Those coordinates would go back to how we started the conversation on, let's say, the DNA and the disease and health and all that being frequency-based, but not the type of frequency and pressurized way of that we measure frequency, but more of a biological vacuum-based, the biological, quote-unquote, vacuum as a basis for developing instrumentation for that. Or a consciousness intuitive base. For example, the consciousness study that there is such a thing as psychic powers or psychic ability in remote viewing or telepathy or telekinesis. Once the underlying basis of how those things work is, let's say, established publicly, more of those coordinates will be understood. So if you were to speak with an Andromedan or Arcturian that uses that, you will find that the majority of those coordinates are consciousness based. In other words, the way the mind works. Now, by the way, I will plug in Donald Marshall if anyone wants to look him up. It sounds kind of crazy about the cloning centers. One of the statements that he made, which I heard before he had gone public, is that the entire mind and human body, everything about the mind that can be known, was already mapped and completely known by the 1930s, right?
By who?
By the people that established the cloning centers underground that Donald Marshall speaks of.
The reptilians.
Well, yeah, kind of a low-level reptilian that brought a German faction to places in Antarctica and Tibet to show leftover equipment from the Atlantean age, let's say. And they were able to revive this equipment because the poor lizards couldn't do it. They just have a claw with 2 digits on it. You know, they get really sad when they try to work the equipment because they're just little dumb lizards, right? They just have 2 little fingers. So they brought the humans over there that would work with them as well. But the entire mind and consciousness has already been mapped. In other words, consciousness transfer, where consciousness can be taken from one being and put into a clone body and vice versa during REM consciousness transfer. So the technology, which supposedly cannot be blocked, there's no disclosure of how that can be blocked or how consciousness moves. That's already been known by humans for almost 100 years, and it's being kept secret. Once that is put forward, what you just mentioned about the coordinates and time and space and all that, then that will be commonplace.
And since you brought up Donald Marshall, do you have any idea how the reptilian hierarchy that he mentions relates to the Draco or, the reptilians that you brought up in the last episode?
Yes, very low level, very, very low level. The ones that I brought up on the last episode, the reason I did that is because there's still a lot of talk about them, the reptilians and the Draco being defeated, as I'm sure you've heard, and the humans winning, and on and on and on and on, and they cannot define any of that. And the ones that I mentioned, maybe half a dozen or a dozen groups, those are the very, very high order. And as you go down the order, the ones that are very low order, like a hybrid of a hybrid of a hybrid down mixed, would be the ones that are on Earth and dealing with the humans that people find, well, they eat our babies and they need human whatever. The ones that I mentioned do not eat, just as humans will not have to eat again in the future, right? So those are some like really low level hybrid or leftovers here on the Earth. They would be when I say low level, it's so low, it would be when you look at a human being or an animal, and then you look at bacteria, a simple single-celled organism. That's the difference between the Draco and the reptiles that Donald Marshall is talking about. That's how far removed they are.
Right. And is there a way to tell when you're taken through REM abductions from when you're actually astral traveling?
I think that several reasons against astral traveling. First of all, the amount of hostility that is in that world, meaning the non-physical 3D world, is so high that if anyone truly did that, they would come back severely damaged mentally, or would not come back, or you would not hear stories like you hear now. The other part of astral traveling is a scenario run on people from the quote-unquote cloning centers, where they pre-drug the clone body, and when your consciousness is transferred, you're already pre-drugged with scopolamine or many, many other things, right? Sodium pentothal, sodium mannitol, and you'll believe anything that you're told, right?
Yeah.
Now, the thing when I say the cloning centers, it's very prevalent. There are millions of people involved, if not tens of millions involved in this scenario. So it's not a rare occurrence.
But there are such things as out-of-body experiences that are legitimate and maybe possibly the same places that your mind wanders, your etheric or astral body wanders when you sleep, right? And
yes,
they abuse that and make it seem like you're actually there.
Sure. But actually you are actually there. If your consciousness is grabbed while you're sleeping and brought to a cloning center and you're in a clone body that has been pre-drugged, you will believe anything that you're told. That you're in
But
nirvana.
You're actually just in a physical clone.
You're just in a physical clone. It's just as physical as we are speaking right now through Skype, but even more physical because you'll be in front of people that are playing a scenario on you. That's why I speak so poorly about a lot of the communities that I'm not going to say directly SSP, but anyway, because I think they're all victims of that, the ones that are public.
Well, with exceptions, but I would say
very small exceptions, yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that there's so much disinformation about the Draco being overcome and stuff, but
Not going
yeah,
to
that
happen.
also goes against the mildly famous prediction through the Looking Glass that they have definitely been defeated. So that also goes hand in hand with the idea that the Looking Glass has stopped working for the last 20 or so years.
Yes, if there is such a thing.
Well, there apparently are there are multiple.
There's enough. It might exist, but what we're being told about it is not necessarily accurate. Because you can, here, let's just move forward. You can develop your own Looking Glass. You don't need their stuff. You already have everything that you need. If once you understand you're only one, your incarnation here is less than 1 or 2% of what you potential is.
Yeah. And about lastly, about the underground cloning chambers, would you say that everyone, including us, is a target? And is there a way to defend against it?
Unknown. I would say yes on the first one and unknown on the second. I think the best way to defend oneself, if one does not know how to do it directly, is by involving a third party. Like, for example, a very wealthy guy, he's not a triple master black belt, and so he may not be able to defend himself. What does he do? He gets on the phone and calls a security company to protect him, you see? So that would be the easiest thing for people. I call on, personally, I'll give my personal beliefs and allegiances. I call on the Elohim, right?
That's
protect.
Pretty good support.
Yeah, and they're very powerful, and I would venture to say they're probably the most technically advanced in our universe right now, at parity with the Draco. Because the Draco have been changing their whole ideology the few thousand years to involve more of a light aspect, more of a duality, instead of going around and just conquering and dominating everything. See, the core of philosophy, I'll go out on a limb, of the Draco is that you must destroy to create. So let's say you're a Draco and you go into a system that seems to be okay. Well, it's not as okay, it's not as good as if we destroy it and recreate it. It'll be better then. Right? And there are also some factions that just destroy and don't create. That's called a capitalist, by the way. The definition of a capitalist is when you're done using something, you destroy it so no one else can use it. But anyway, I think Zen would like that political little dig there. But they are understanding now more that there is a underlying harmony that they don't have to affect and appreciate what's already there. The Elohim are basically the human collective that has been interacting with them, and every time they interact with the Draco, the Elohim gets stronger and stronger. And
of course.
And the Draco are the type of beings that if they go, let's say, to subdue someone, and that someone that they're trying to take over fights back and almost wipes out the group that they sent to subdue, they will not call in reinforcements to completely destroy them. They're going to stop and say, wow, what great warriors they are. Maybe we're better working with them than trying to kill them, you see. So every time the Elohim engaged the Draco came back and said, wow, look how strong they're getting. Eventually, maybe we'll work together, but not now still, you see. Yeah, so there's a very high level of reason and honor in the Draco, by the way, which is never really discussed.
Yeah, there is just one person who stresses that for them honor is everything, and we only say that we're all about love but don't actually respect it, whereas they live and die by honor. But
yes, and when they die, they do it consciously, by the way, not like we do. Because let's say, for example, they died by accident, they have the ability to transfer everything and restart. Like you hear about, like regenerate themselves. So let's say they died in battle, they can just be regenerated, no problem. When they really do die, it's a conscious effort. They say, okay, that's it, I'm had enough here, all these millions or billions of years, it's time for me to go. But go ahead.
There's also a certain degree of hypocrisy with all this reptilian slamming, because without them being more apparently harsh, you wouldn't have this complexity of the scenarios going on Earth. They're necessary as much as anything, and they are apparently part of why we are so physical right here, and why it's attractive idea for all these more allegedly high density beings to incarnate as us, and it wouldn't have been possible without the reptilians who get all the bad reputation. So also I don't know if you can vouch for this, but apparently the way they operate is they subvert the population. They only infiltrate it, and they usually pick one that is neither too advanced nor too primitive, and usually one that's part of these higher alliances. And then they hybridize just a little bit with them, just a few percentages, and just enough to have resonance with them, and then just guide them after their own will. Apparently, this is also the divergence that happened around 5,000 years ago. And do you know anything about the dumbing down of the humanity that happened around that time?
Yes, more than 5,000, I'd say 13,000 or between the 13,000 and 5,000 years ago. But I would suggest that the dumbing down is several reasons. One is that humans, as we are today, the human collectives, is only 1 or 2%, 10%. The best ascended masters, what they call most magical type people, would be 10% of what a human can be expressed, right? The other thing is humans have a certain quality. They can go into many worlds, even to the highest worlds. And because of that, when they're put in a universe such as this one, which is, I call it, it's a B movie. Let's say you took the best classically trained actor and put him in a B movie. Does that make it an A movie? No, it's still a B movie, right? So when you have a fully charged or fully enabled human in a B grade universe like this, eventually they're going to lean more into doing bad things than good things, right? They'll, for example, look at a group of people that like a different color than they do, something really superficial like that. And because they like red and you like blue, they're no good. So we're going to capture them while they're sleeping and hybridize them with pigs. This is how humans are in a B universe, very wicked. So to keep them going and keep them manifested, what you do is you enable them, you manifest them at only 1 or 2% of their ability. So their main struggle is just food, clothing, and shelter. And anything else is optional. It's very difficult to go beyond that. Let me give an example. If you study the body the way that we gave the outline and I have in the past, everything that you need in terms of nutrition, eating food, is a fallacy. Everything that you need is produced in all of the glands that you have. All of the glands and bladders that you have, the pituitary, the pineal, the gallbladder, all the various glands that you have in your body can produce all of the nutrition, because they do that anyway, by the way. You cannot process carbohydrates, proteins, or minerals, or metals, or water in your body unless the glands play a part. So they have been tuned down and dumbed down. So you have to have this very large intestinal tract and all that to remove the energy from the food so the glands can process it. Where actually the glands, if they were activated in the body, they would take everything from the environment, sunlight, or whatever environment you were in, and you wouldn't have to eat. You would be quote unquote breath-arian, right? So this is very well known and very well established in those that study how the human body really works. So right now it's very difficult for people to be quote unquote breatharian, because we've been put in a situation where our main concern is spending most of our time to get food and water and making shelter just to exist. That's why my biggest advice to young people is don't do anything here. This is not a place to do anything grand. It's about food, clothing, and shelter. And once you establish that, some people say, Greek, that sounds oversimplified and not very good. I said, yes, but once you establish that being here is about food, clothing, and shelter, and what you want to do is get the best quality food, clothing, and shelter for yourself being here, while you're on that quest to determine that you want to acquire and afford the best things here, you will also learn about everything else in the meantime. But I tell people, if you have a great idea or an invention or whatever, this is not the place to do it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it or make it, right? You should do it, but don't say I'm going to do this for the world, because this is not the type of world that needs that. Here, I'll give you an example, and this is not to brag or anything like that. I was on a Skype call recently with someone who I had not seen or spoken to for over a decade. And the person recognized me, and they're local here in Tucson, and they said, hey, Greek, I remember you sold me your motorcycle and all that. And I said, yeah, I remember. He says, tell the people how you got the motorcycle to run on water. right? And I'm like, oh, why? Why do I have to do that? I said, oh yeah, that's right. The one you got ran on water, right? A regular combustion engine, right? So, am I good? Do you see me doing websites and, hey, this is how we're going to get away from pet, right? Do you see? No, I don't talk about those things because this is not the place for it. But it doesn't mean I won't make it and make one and sell it to someone who needs a motorcycle. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And like the blind guy who came to your couch and you made him see. What are you, Jesus or something? No, I don't go around saying that. Right?
Yeah. But
because, yeah.
About the dumbing down, there has to be intricate reasons, and I guess the most plausible one that you maintain is that we're a seed bank, which also goes hand in hand with the theory that these many seeder races don't want us to be fully sentient, so as to not lose the rights for continuing to tinker with our DNA. Would you say that's right?
It's more than DNA. DNA are the tree rings in the tree. No, they just tell you about the tree, how old it is. Do you know there's a guy, I think Lipton or someone else, that did experiments with protozoa. He removed the DNA and they just multiplied and lived a normal life, right? But after a generation or two, they stopped though. So you really don't need DNA to be alive. It's overrated. Anything that you see everybody pushing. Sorry, go ahead.
Just so I can look him up. Lipton.
Yeah, you could put in Lipton genetic research, like Lipton the tea. Yeah. He did a bunch of research on how the DNA is overrated. Look, the public does not speak the truth, and the truth is not spoken to the public, right? This has been going on for, like you said, 5,000 years, part of the dumbing down. So if you have 3 or 4 more people talking about something, it's probably BS, So you'll be amazed to see if you look online, for example, even like YouTube and all that. If you find a site that has 5 subscribers and 10 views, you know what? And it's been around for years, they probably have the truth. If you see a site that has thousands and tens of thousands of subscribers and thousands of views, nah. That's a very quick, broad brush way to see, because the people won't understand. Here, one thing I always used to say, you know how everyone describes the education system being completely in tatters, right? And it's all propaganda. If you created an education system, real education, no one would go. No one. Because the minute they showed up, they won't understand anything you're saying at all. It would be so different and so bizarre when they compare it to their family life and their culture that no one will go. So it's a waste of time, you see, ultimately, until everything changes. But the dumbing down is more than the dumbing down. It's the way we're set up from the beginning.
Exactly. It shouldn't be looked at as a handicap, really, because we are a cosmic project of all these different species. I mean, it sounds like opium, and also they tried their best, all these advanced cities like the Greys, to fabricate the DNA for generations, and it just failed. So they still need this hybridization, and apparently some of them even tried to shave off layers of our energy field just to get souls to draw themselves to their useless, clone bodies.
Yes, and the shaving off is more like a governor. Most people, I think someone recently communicated to me that more people are starting to talk about the synthetics that are here on Earth. In other words, when you meet someone, they look like a human, smell like a human, talk like a human, and they're not human. They're like a synthetic manifestation, right? So there is that exception. I would say a good 20 to 30% of the human population is not human right now. They're either synthetics or they're parasited. And where do you find them? Doctors, lawyers, governors, government jobs, nurses, priests, rabbis, imams, right? That's where you find them, because they typically go into, they become, being a synthetic and being a parasite and just sitting in the corner of a room or whatever doesn't really affect the society. They're placed cosmically in positions where they can influence others, right? So, and once you understand, I don't get into publicly how to do a witch hunt and but privately I do talk to people about how to determine who's a synthetic or not with great accuracy, and they kind of flip out when they start scanning the people around them. But I will never do that publicly, at least at this point. But if you just the notion is just as important right now as actually showing who is a synthetic and who isn't. But the rest that are left, there are things you can do to activate, your potential up to, let's say, 10% human instead of 1% or 2%, right? And a lot of that has to do with things that I've been saying and some others, and who the others are, I don't know. But in other words, learning how things work. Why is it that every time you go into a field, the quote unquote experts are telling you the opposite of what's been memorialized in their own books, for example? Right? If you go to any religious person, what their leader, they're going to tell you the opposite of what's memorialized in the text they're supposed to subscribe to. If you speak to a doctor, who are expert liars, by the way, you will find that what they're telling you is contrary to what's memorialized in the texts that they use as part of their field of study. The same with attorneys and the same so on and so on. Okay? So start off there. Start off with, see what's been memorialized. And the reason why things are memorialized, meaning stored, information, whether it's written on stone, paper, or digital, the reason why something is written down and held is because guess what? It's important, and it's a courtesy to pass this information on to future people or current, anyone who wants to reference it. But instead, you have people that take on whatever jobs they do, let's say a bus driver or a painter or someone, a chef, and they want to learn about astrophysics or the human body. They go and they listen to people that are supposedly experts in the field, but if they go a little further and look at the text that they're supposed to subscribe to, they'll find what's in the text is very different, right? Because people don't want a home-cooked meal that takes 3 hours to make. They want something out of a can that's reheated. So when you're going to a quote-unquote expert, that's what you're getting. You're getting a meal out of a can, which is not good for you eventually. So until people start taking more time, and if, let's say you're a chef and you want to learn about astrophysics, unfortunately, you're going to have to learn how to go through technical documents very quickly. I've also done talks on how if you gave me, let's say, 1,000-page technical book, in 6 hours, I can have a discussion, in-depth discussion with the author of that book. Not because I read the entire 1,000 pages, I know how to go, and I used to instruct people on how to go through massive amounts of academic and anything that's written or memorialized very quickly and get the main points out of it, you see.
And you can condense it down to like 15 minutes. But
yes,
also, I think that that's the whole point of text in the first place, is to memorialize these things because of the nature of this grade of humanity and in any event. So you also mentioned the Noah's Ark, that it wasn't like we thought. It was more of a goodwill gesture on the part of the humans, and the rest was really just a collection from the Elohim of the genetic material, and that they don't lose track of these things when they do get lost, so-called, in the cataclysm, right?
No, nothing is lost. And let me just put this in perspective. There's so many changes that happen. Like, for example, the cancel culture that they're talking about now. If you find any old Greek Sonic events from 10 years ago, I talked about the cancel culture in great detail before it hit now. And the reason why I did is because the cancel culture was borrowed from the ancient world. In other words, if in ancient Egypt, if you became unpopular, what they did is they went and erased your name and memory from all records, even government records. Where now, if you went and try to erase someone from government records, they would say, well, it's a criminal offense. You cannot do that. But even then, they were that drastic. So where I'm leading to that with Noah's Ark, if you read what they call the New Testament in the book of Shimon Kepha, or what they call Peter, you will see that he mentions in there, he mentions, I'm paraphrasing, that Noah's Ark was still a tourist attraction back then. We're talking about 1900 years ago. Just like you would have a tourist attraction now, like the Busege Mountains or the Grand Canyon or the Niagara Falls, or some ruins like the pyramids or tourist attractions. That's how less than 2,000 years ago Noah's Ark was. It was very well known where it was and what it was, verified. People would go there. But now, oh my gosh, where is it? Did it even exist? What happened? You see?
Yeah. And is it true that Babylon was a case of the, ENKs or whatever branch of humanity getting too big for their own safety, and then these so-called gods, these ETs, having to, quell them and leave the intermediary elites to just be the masters?
Yes, very much. There are no gods as such. Just like if you were technologically advanced and went to a gullible, less technologically advanced, and you brought your devices, and you told them they were a god, you may not convince everyone right away, but eventually you will, right? So the term God is a very corrupted term. It doesn't mean that the Elohim and others don't deserve, the utmost respect. It's just that I don't see the term as being accurate, but not because, you brought them up as gods. But I would suggest that the state of the past people were not much better if we're discussing the ones that are incarnated like us, 1 or 2%, They weren't much better off, really.
Yeah, and apparently the first successful ones like Adam of humanity were on the power of these gods, in quotes, and that they were used to see these many other planets, which is why you find many human species, and that the mixture between the ones that were left alone, which are us, the more rudimentary, and the more advanced ones that were used to see planets, are the so-called demigods.
Oh, I see. Yeah, the early ones, yes, most likely, because let's say we look at the conventional Western theology, in the biblical text, you have Adam and his several generations, and then they're brought up as the men of renown, the men that were the heroes. Like in the ancient Greece, it was known the age of the heroes, right? The men that did incredible things. But Adam was never classified as such because he was kind of like the prototype. But before we continue on the human lineage, Zen, I want to just honor what your request was.
Listen, this might seem cheese dick to you, Greek, but there's this one YouTube show that I always watch. It's called Nuke's Top 5. And I know it's all stuff that can be explainable. It's a paranormal channel. And I know it's not going to phase you. Anyway, the thing is there's this, I call it, because I lack so much knowledge, maybe a skinwalker or something. But many times people will catch what I deem as, and I want you to debunk, if not, or refine, a skinwalker or a rake, and they're out screwing around in the forest late at night. It's some young, dumb kids, and they'll hear some extreme guttural. And I don't think these kids have the time or the technology to play with to make such a good fake. But I'm going to hit screen share. I'm going to let you watch maybe a 15-second clip. And I just want you to tell me, one, if it's real. If it is real, what is this? Is it something that a species before humanity? Is it something the CIA released? Is this...
you don't even have to. I think I'm familiar with it. Let me just make a quick roundabout on that. First of all, the stranger it is, whether it's a story, a video, or an experience account, probably the more true it is. If it sounds plausible, it's not true, most likely. Okay, I know that sounds crazy. The other thing is it's a variety of things, that something coming out of the ground, most likely, because things that come out of the sky are not visible or audible to us. So it's something coming out from a different density in the ground. Like if we look at the accounts, let's say, of the collating centers, they have the vril lizards there. There are many accounts of them, and also the ability to hybridize. There are also, like I mentioned earlier, advanced humans would attack other advanced humans because of very trivial reasons. Like they serve chocolate chip ice cream when we think that's no good, so let's capture them and hybridize them with pigs. That's how people are, by the way. They're that nasty, right? So you have still people on the surface, quote, I don't like to call them government. By the way, you have no government, right? All the governments are bankrupt. So calling a bankrupt entity as a legitimate entity is not accurate, right? All of the governments are operating as administrations under the worldwide bankruptcy, right? Under the World Economic Forum, the UN and all that, right? This is a fact, but it's something you don't talk about, supposedly. Even alternative people don't like to talk about it, but it needs to be understood. So these people that can afford to do these things, would be another way to say it, do these things,
Well,
they're major experimentation.
Can we watch this little clip real quick?
Go ahead, sure.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna do a screen share. So this show is a paranormal show, and it's as close as I can get because I don't stay up late and I don't go explore. And it's a bunch of people that have no fear, go screw around in the forest or go walk miles through sewer systems. And when they, to prove that there's no such thing as aliens or other sorts of beings, and then they see real shit, get scared shitless, and run away. And I simply want, like, this one thing was just a quick example. It's some creature, the closest I can say in my naivete, it looks like the creature from Pan's Labyrinth. And I just wanted to know, is this some ancient species that, just dwells underground? But also, too, what blows my mind, Greek, is all these people go look for ghosts, look for rakes, look for all this stuff. They never have an AK-47. They never have backup flashlights and all this kind of stuff. If I saw that, yeah, I'm going to be scared. I want to shoot it, bring it, haul its ass out, and bring it to the light and say, look, this shit really exists. That's what blows my mind. I want to show people.
Yeah. Okay. I did see what you're saying. Don't know. It's kind of vague as well.
Okay.
But at this point, I would suggest that the second part of what you said, you want to try to convince people. Don't bother.
Well, they couldn't argue. They couldn't even have an argument. If I had some weird skin,
it doesn't matter. No evidence. One thing, if you've on the past Sonic events with Ocelli and all that, I kept saying. Towards the later part of I kept saying no level of evidence or truth or whatever will change the ideology and the culture that you're in. As a matter of fact, evidence means nothing, right? With these people here and the synthetics and the parasited ones and the whatever, evidence means nothing. Like, for example, if you hijacked all of the mainstream TV and gave people the truth about anything,
I dream doing that. I know.
The average person would go, "Oh man, that's so weird, but it's cool." And the more educated academic will say, "Well, that's a novel way to look at it," right? And then, like, right after it's all done, a minute later, no less than a minute later, they go right back to what they're doing. You know why? Because you can't take a pig to a debutante ball until people get the pig genes. You know what I mean? Not that they're really pigs, but yeah. So you get that out of their system, which is what's coming. The templates are going to be changing. So,
you're right, Greg. Yeah, I appreciate it. I know it seems like a dumbed down point compared to the sophisticated stuff you and Daniel were talking about earlier. I watched the show.
No, it's not sophisticated at all. Sorry, it's not. It's the basics that we should have learned when we were as children. Look, let me give you an example. On other worlds, there are 8-year-olds that have the equivalent of 4 graduate degrees by the time they're 8. In 4 or 5 different subjects at the top of their field by the time they're 8 years old, right?
What are some of these planets? Where are these places? That was one.
They're everywhere. There's look. What is that formula, Daniel? The possibility of planets. What's it called? The how many stars there are times how many planets times how many. Anyway, they're everywhere. You go out.
I don't know if there was one name of something I could start researching or.
No. It's very difficult to research because everything is about opinion these days. He said, she said, and experiencers that couldn't pour piss out of a boot with instruction on the heel. So you're just going to have to wait. You're not going to have to wait much longer, really. I mean, you're fairly young. Within a decade, your answer will come.
Okay.
The main thing with many things that I say, most things that I do say, I give a reference point and the real reason and logic, but just by saying, hey, like shaking up someone, like, wake up, look at this. What do you see right away? Start from that. Yeah. Many of the things that I might begin to say here and now, I may not give references, but what's important is that you heard it. Did you acknowledge, what I said? Do you understand what I said? File it away for a little bit time more in the future where it'll make more sense. I think that is more helpful.
And that's why I'm always that's all this I have.
Yeah. Like here, I like using, I used to like using the Kennedy assassination as an example. And I like to use the 9/11 as an example also. And anything else, even what happened the past 2 years with the pandemic as an example. If you look at what's being put in front of the people, it seems like the formula is the dumber you make it and the more obviously false that you make it, the more people will believe it. It seems to be. And what's really going on is so basic that the children should be able to see it, like the emperor has no clothes, right? So, and I've talked about this, as we go into the future, it'll be even dumber and even more blatantly ridiculous, but the people will believe it. Well, with the help of the synthetics and the parasites pushing it down their throat, right?
That's the thing. That's my whole qualm, that's what makes me so sick. Yes, I want to learn, just how to live forever and anti-aging and all these things that should have been taught to us. But the fact, like, I was in 7th grade when I saw 9/11 go down, and I was just like, this is fake. This is not right. Or at least I wasn't. I mean, it's happening, but I'm not buying the story we're given.
The discussions that I can have on it, which I said I would never do, is so funny on 9/11. Here, let me just interject one thing. The guys that they sent to admit, it was a NATO operation, but okay, so they even have it in their own paperwork, but and it's listed under insurance fraud. But it is so funny, the discussions compared to what people see, that it's laughable. I'll give you an example. When they executed what they did in New York City that day, they obviously sent like half of the people knew what they were doing, the other half were a bunch of Muppets. Okay, in other words, going from north to south, the buildings involved were north would be building 7, and then just south of that is the North Tower, and just south of that is the South Tower. The nuclear devices that are put in there, they're called atomic gates. So for example, this is very well known since the 1950s. The Golden Gate Bridge, the Verrazano Bridge, the main tunnels, the main roadways, and the main monuments in this country are rigged to blow with nukes if their country is invaded. This is very typical tactics. If your country's being invaded, you blow your own bridges so the enemy can't use them, right? It's very, very common. Also for safety concerns. Okay, so this is what they screwed up on 9/11. The tunnels that are underneath, by the way, the World Trade Center and many other buildings, the devices are not placed under the buildings. They have to be maintained. They're lithium hydrogen charges. They have to be maintained. The health of the zero box and the core has to be maintained by technicians. It's usually done in a building outside, and it's delivered to the building at time of demolition underground. We're talking about 300 feet underground during the time of, the prescribed time of when these things are going to be activated or detonated. So building 7 was where they maintained these things. So what they did is they blew out the side of the building of the North Tower first, which was a screw up. They should have, because if you notice that when the buildings went down, the tower that got hit with the plane second came down first, where it really should have been the one that got hit with the plane first came down first, right? Because they said it was due to fire, right? So you had the North Tower gets hit with the plane first, and then the South Tower gets hit with the plane second, but they bring down the one that got hit with the plane last first. Why? It doesn't make any sense if it's fire, because the fire has to burn longer, right? Well, that was the screw up. They should have exploded. There was no planes. What they did was they lined up plane parts on the 78th floor, so when they blew out the side of the building, those plane parts came out with it. But anyway, these Muppets, they blew the wrong building first. And the reason why they had to take away the one that got hit with the plane second down first is because if they took down the one that got hit with the plane first, sounds confusing, right? It could have damaged the tunnel to the other building that was further away, then they couldn't bring that one down, right? So they had to do this really stupid thing. Now, the second tower that came down, which is closer to building 7, is after the first one was brought down. The Muppets that were sent to deliver the device, there's a tunnel and you wheel it down, and it's by wire. It's a DBW detonator. Anyway, we're wheeling it down to the second building, but already the South Tower that was already taken down, the reaction was starting to creep over to the foundation of this building. We're like, holy shit, their teeth must have fallen out and their hair must have fallen out, and they got scared. So they didn't put the second device, zero box, directly under the center of the building. So when you see the buildings from aerial view, you'll see that the first one was completely dissolved from the center out, but the second one, the corner of the building still managed to stay because they didn't wheel the device all the way down where they were supposed to because it was too hot, right? So this is the things that I see when I look at these things, the obvious flaws. Right. And then obviously building 7 was also taken down with the same device, because if they didn't, people in the government didn't know this was going on. This is done by people who, are much higher. For example, the Port Authority, that is the authority of that whole part of Manhattan Island, is a sovereign corporation. You could look this up. The feds have no jurisdiction there. The state has no jurisdiction there. Nobody. It's the Port Authority. Most of these large complexes in big cities have their own little district that's like a country unto itself, like the Vatican. Okay. All right. So anyway, when the investigators, if they didn't take down Building 7 the same way, the investigators would go there and they don't look. If you're setting off nuclear demolition in a major city, 150 kiloton devices, you don't want to leave the control room so somebody's mom can find it, right? You get it? So anyway, I see all the flaws and the mistakes that they made that day because I know about what they did in great detail. And, and that's the world that I'm in. Look how they screwed this up, but they still got it done because obviously they sent morons to do it. Most of them were morons, at least. But most people are still arguing whether it was a satellite thing or explosives put on each floor, which is impossible. I mean, this is like, so the reason I said this whole thing about 9/11 is, like Daniel brought up, talking about pandemics and how it really works. You really want to get into how diseases work and how you maintain human health in the body when the people are still just wondering about the most ridiculous stuff you can imagine. They can't even see what's in front of them at all. I mean, the people, meaning, yes, even in the alternative. You see what I mean?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, you can't. This is not what's going on. Here's the thing. I always give a soliloquy about this. If half of the world, half of the people in the world helped one person, that's the whole world is taken care of, right? So if 1/3 of the world help two people, that's the whole world taken care of, right? So if one person helps 9 people, oh, if only 10% of the people each help 9 people, that takes care of the whole world. But you see, there's a point where the numbers get so small that so few people can only do so much, right? But I know that from ancient writings, ancient philosophies, intuition and all that, if you come to this existence, this world, this society, whatever society you're in, and you can help one person to make their life better, just one, not half the people helping one, but just one person helping one other person, that's quite an accomplishment, right? Like in the biblical text, it says one of the highest things a human can do is die for their friend. Well, it doesn't really say that directly. Die for their friend means you would go through anything it takes just to make someone else better, okay? Or continue with their life. So if you can do a sonic event where you show people things and tell people things that will make the change in their life. I've gotten over 2,000 emails in the past few years. Since I've listened to you, Greek, I know how to eat better, think better, fix things better. My relationship's gone better. Over 2,000 emails like that, you see? And I'm not even trying. I don't write books. People say, Greek, you need to write a book. I said, okay, if you're an author and you want to write a book, you're presuming that whoever reads that book has comprehension, right? Otherwise, it's a waste of time.
That and your book would get banned. Just be more negative attention towards.
Well, it's not only that. It would be foolish to do it because I would presume that whoever's reading it is actually understanding what is being written, and that's a bad presumption because you can't meet everyone. In other words, if I were to write a book and give it out, I would have to send them a test first, maybe 20 or 30 questions, and if depending on how they answered those questions, then I would sell them the book. Otherwise, it's a waste of their time and a waste of my time. The same thing was, I believe, like when people are young as in this society, they should have all their internal reproductive organs plugged up. And when they want to have a baby, they go to an authority and they have to take various cognitive tests, psychological tests, mental tests. And then once they pass all those things, then you open up the reproductive organs so they could reproduce. That would be the responsible way to do it.
Meeting a level of standards, yes.
Yeah. Because why is it that not only the ugliest, poorest, and dumbest people are wheeling around 15 or 20 children or 6 children, and the people that are really trying to get their stuff together have no children, right?
I find that it's useless to try as well with people. They have to come halfway because, like you say, most of them are cosmically censored. So, but
yes, it's the cosmic censorship. That's why bother? Don't do anything. In other words, in a large scale, cultural scale, you do it for yourself, your people that are close to you. It doesn't mean your family, right? Because your family sometimes is your biggest enemy. And on when you go to higher level things, because the concept of the family is a social, whatever culture you're in, right?
And
yeah.
And you also earlier mentioned remote viewing, and I know you have some experience with this, and would you be able to go over just how effective it is and what are its limitations?
Okay, very good. There's a big psyop called control remote viewing. You see all these ex-military people and all that, right? And no one goes against them because it works on a general whatever. And the reason why it's a psyop is because they could never offer any explanations. Just like when you go to an alternative doctor, they're going to try to say, take my supplement because it's absorbed better. You're like, oh my gosh. But at least they're not promoting the mainstream stuff, but they're just as bad. Let me just say, when you remote view, what it is you're tapping into that 10% human, or, you don't want to work with the 1% or 2% human that you are, that, you've been bred to be here by the gods, let's say. You want to tap into the other one further on. And you can do that momentarily, only for a very small fraction. So when someone does, whether it's the controlled remote viewing or any kind of guesswork, The real information, the best information, appears in less than a tenth of a second or less than a second. It's your first hunch, and you have to exercise it like a muscle. Right? To give you an example, there was a small remote viewing video. Guess what's in the bag? And they show one of these cooler bags, and as soon as I read the title, I looked at it and I got a vision of something that looked like a banana, large and yellow. So then I went to the end of the video, and it was a large yellow highlight marker. Okay, but if I started saying, well, is it a banana? Maybe it makes sense. It's this way. No. It's all I got was something large and yellow, and that was close enough. So when you start working on this, picking up momentary bits of information down to nanoseconds, people that have been practicing for a long time, just like a Tai Chi or Kung Fu master can take a knife or a gun from your hand if you point it at them so fast that you won't even know it happened, right? That's how you do it. So the way the remote viewing works is when you look at something, everyone is doing this anyway. It just happens, the information comes so quickly that you miss it. So you must train to capture very rapid fire bits of information. Some people it's visual, some people it's audible, some people it's other sensory, could be taste, smell, feeling, right? So you have to know what you are tuned into the most and learn how to capture split-second impulses of input when you're presented with a thought. That's the essence of remote viewing. And
does it have to be blind or double blind, or what would you say is the best protocol? And go ahead.
Yeah, the reason they do the blind and the double blind, they say is best. That's why I say it's a psyop when they say you can only do it that way, is because it removes you from what you're casually used to. It doesn't have to be blind at all, but it's best to do that because it removes you from what you are casually used to doing and thinking, because you have an inner dialogue with yourself, which has its own personality. Like some people project a different personality from what they really are. A lot of people do that, right? They have one personality that they adjust their personality for their family life, they adjust their personality for their work life, or when they go to the bar or whatever, or picking up a prostitute, right? Like a priest. No, I'm serious. A priest, for example, will have a certain personality that he exudes when he's at the church and the congregation, a different one when he's with the clergy, the people that work from it, and a different when he's picking up a prostitute.
Okay? Right. And would you agree that if you have many people concentrated on the same target, that will will add some validation to your results? Collective remote viewing, I find it very underrated.
Yes, no, that's underrated and correct. I'll show you a metaphor on how that's so correct, is because when you have one flash, that's like looking at one frame of a piece of film. When you have 16 people getting those flashes, now it's like 16 frames. And if you get thousands of people, you're actually making a movie now. You have so many pieces that you have this large mosaic. You can call it a mosaic, or you can call it a film, like a reel of film. Yeah, and it changes. Right. Some of the group might get some, the other group might get other part of it. But when you can come all together, the thing is, if you can communicate and bring it together coherently, of course, then you know what? There's nothing you cannot do. Just like in the Bible, it says, if we let them build this tower, when they come together, there is nothing that they will not be able to do, right? That's the main thing. That's why how many times everything political, everything religious, academic is to separate everyone. I think I rubbed Zen the wrong way. We had some early conversations, and I said, everybody needs to come together almost with a hive mind, with the same mind, because then that collective mind is not because you're all a bunch of drones, but that collective mind will be like this gigantic reservoir that you can all tap into once you put all of your differences aside. And I remember Zen said, that doesn't sound good, right? I was like, well, you got to think about it.
Yeah, no, I've heard bad things about it before, prior, but Greek, everything you say proves true. So,
yeah, it's a matter of when everyone puts all their differences down, because they're not real. Look, if you have something that's distinctive, critically distinctive and different, hold on to it. But if you start examining everything, you'll notice that we all can come together with all in one thought and one mind, and not because we all are robotic drones, mindless. No, what that'll do is it'll create a reservoir, an ethereal reservoir that we all can tap into.
Yes. And regarding the malleability of the predictions derived from remote viewing, what would you say is the number of possibilities when you're looking in the past versus the present and the future?
Yeah, you're going to have to put that together somehow. I mean, not you, but the more you go into the past, you're actually going closer to the future. And the more you go into the future, the more you're going to the actual past. I know I've said this before, and people say I have to think about what you said, because each universe has a template, and there's a level of predeterminacy. There's local events, whether it's a cultural or a personal, that you have what seems random. Yes, there's a template that you're going to eat lunch every day, but it doesn't say that every day it's going to be tuna fish or ham sandwich, right? You might have a little leeway in that, right? But there's the template, everyone will eat lunch that day, is what I'm talking about. So the template for everyone's life, culture, world, or whatever has already been set. And once the blueprint is written, then it's put into manifestation. So once the blueprint for a building is finished by the architects, then they go out into the field, and you'll see there's nothing in the field. They bring the bulldozers and they start building, and a few months later it's done. When you go look at when the building first started, that's when the blueprint was more new. And when you look at when the building was finished, more into the future, that's when the blueprint was more old, more towards the end. So when we go into our past, we're actually going into the beginning of that blueprint time, which is actually more into the future. And as we go into our future, we're going towards the end of the plan, which is more into the past. It took longer to plan, you see. So once you understand that loop, it's not a loop, but once you understand that structure, you can call it a circle within a circle, or various geometric forms within geometric forms. Start to remote view it that way and watch what happens.
Right.
Instead of asking, let's see the future, let's see what the template, how the template ended up, which if you translate what I just said, how the template ended up, it means our future. If you start remote viewing it from that perspective, you will have like 99% accuracy.
Yeah. And when you're remote viewing and you're doing it right, you're not front loading or using your bias, whatever, would you say that you're tapping into the akashic field, or is it more of an informational exchange between the viewer and the target?
Okay, the akashic field is it's another thing, like when you hear about the Draco, very little information, usually not true. The akashic field is a resonant point. By the way, here, let me let this out. It's been said by others. I'm trying to think who else, a long time ago. From a material, if you can't bring something down to nuts and bolts to a certain point, even consciousness, it's very difficult to handle it, right? Because then it becomes opinion or theory. The Akashic record is actually held in a material way in the noble gases. The gases that like neon, helium, argon, xenon, that do not combine with other elements very easily at all. They're called noble elements. They are the substantive record, resonant physical record of the Akasha. In other words, that's why they do not combine with other substances. That is the material substantive part. Just like we were talking about, everything about the brain has already been mapped, but we're not being told, right? They know everything about the brain and the spirit and teleportation and everything. It has already been established by humans less than 100 years ago. So when we talk about the Akasha, there's many ways. There's one way that we relate to our environment with these noble elements and their effect, and how we're breathing some of them, and how they always exist in a resonant point and they're influencing us. Or do you have to go to another set, another higher density, let's say, of Akasha, where there are other beings that are actually managing them, because that also exists. And that makes it complicated. And I don't know enough about that to talk about it. But I do know that I would consider that people should start considering that the elements that are considered noble or inert are where the physical Akasha, are held. In other words, just how you have these people that do crystal therapy and organite therapy, take the crystal, put it on your forehead, it's going to make you through osmosis somehow better. If you get some people that are really crafty and smart and understand a lot of the stuff myself and others might have talked about in the past, and you know how to work with these noble gases, you're going to get a lot more out of what people talk about the Akasha in a physical sense.
Right. And to bring it more together with the collective remote viewing and with the previous topics discussed, like the Draco and such, the main conclusion, the recurring theme in the remote viewing performed by Farsight on the Galactic Federation was that, which is such a loaded term, but was that they are up against a force that is greater than them, and they're trying to gain freedom through power. But just the fact that they acknowledge that it's a greater force, I thought lent confirmation to the idea that you can never really, overcome the Draco entirely, maybe on a small sector of the galaxy, but that's about it.
No, you're not going to overcome. I mean, by the way, everybody cover their ears. When you said Farsight, you picked one of the worst organizations possible in the world for remote viewing. Sorry to say that, but that's why they're so popular, right? But anyway, you can uncover your ears now. No, you're nothing like that is going to happen ever, ever in the ever that people understand as being ever or forever or whatever. No.
Right.
No, there's no overcoming. The reason, like for example, the reason you think you might have a victory or liberation from them is because they gave it to you. It's kind of like the guy who says, "I'm the boss of the house." How is that? He says, "Well, because my wife said so." Right?
And
you get it?
Yeah, and you also brought up dinosaurs, and the fact that the vegetation, like the ferns, and that themselves, the dinosaurs, were so much taller compared to what we have on the surface today. Would you say that also, if you take into account the ages of the crust, that this is just a hypothesis, but that during the age of the dinosaurs, the planet was much, much smaller in diameter?
Yes, and it was more egg-shaped. In other words, it was very pointy at the ends and oblong on one hemisphere and pointy on the other, just like an egg. If you, by the way, I'm not a proponent of continental drift,
No.
But if you get a bunch of 8-year-olds that have a lot to do, go out and buy some cheap printable maps and have them cut all the land areas out, and then have them get some tape and piece all the land masses together. Guess what it's going to look like? An egg.
Right.
And expand it slightly, it looks like a fat egg. Or a potato. I have some beautiful potatoes here, russets, and they're kind of like egg-shaped. They're pointy on one end and really round on the other, but lumpy across the surface. Big lumps, flat spots. There are some places on some continents that are extremely flat and sunken. They're not
Like
even. Yes, they don't conform at all to anything round by any means. It shows you that there's a vibrational energy field that makes matter solid. That has to be when that's taken into account. When you look at these very distorted fields, areas, physical areas on the Earth, it's not because the material is distorted, but the energy that is holding them together has a certain tendency to make it look like that, right? The energy comes first. But the dinosaurs are very interesting because I brought up the concept of meteors and asteroids. If they are magnetic, as they say predominantly, because you don't have to be completely ferromagnetic. You could be boron and other things are slightly ferromagnetic. But they do tout that they are magnetic. If you have a small magnet approaching a large magnet, regardless if they're spinning or not, they're only going to make contact at the poles, which makes that all natural asteroid and meteorite natural impacts on the Earth happen only at the North Pole and South Pole.
Or
so
close.
If you see, above 80th parallel, let's say, right? Above the 80, let's say.
Like the one on Jupiter.
Yes. So if you see like a big hole in Arizona or a big hole in Yucatan in Mexico near the equator, those were not natural. Those were weapon systems.
But there are those who say that, that the pole flipping isn't limited to 180, but it also goes like 90 degrees, and maybe some would claim that that's the explanation for Yucatan, and but it wasn't a weapon.
Well, it could have been. Well, the one on the Yucatan eventually will be found out that it was a weapon, but the people that threw it down, the humanoids type, don't no longer exist. They were punished for doing that. But that's another story. There are many races of humans that have come and gone, by the way. I think you mentioned that in the Cinemar books as well.
Is the Olmec considered one of them? And what about Roanoke?
No, I'm talking about Roanoke is another thing. Roanoke would be like Scythians that came over here 1,000 years before everyone else. But that didn't like, what was going on. The U.S., in other words, about the ancient Egyptian ruins found here and in Australia, meaning the North America, right?
Yeah,
the whole world's always been populated by everyone. Babylonian, every culture. Everyone has been everywhere all the time. Don't believe, You're taking your information from people who had black people in the Bronx Zoo in 1902. Okay, if you don't believe that, go look it up. People are getting their history information from a group of secret society, whatever, secret culture, academics, or wealthy people, oligarchs, that actually had black people in zoos up until 1902. I know it sounds kind of shocking, but you could look it up. In the Bronx Zoo, in New York City. This is where you're getting your information from. You know, the conventional thought, right?
Yeah, Greek. I wanted to. We started talking about the egg shape of the Earth during dinosaurs, and we started talking about poles, or y'all did. It brings me to Admiral Byrd. If you could give a little spiel on him.
Don't have much of a spiel on him, but this is what I do know. There were again, if it's in the public, are there more than 5 people that are talking about Admiral Byrd? Yes, that means there's a lot of it that's not true. I'm being facetious here, but you know what I mean. Because it's the most popular story, it's the one that should be the least looked at.
Yeah,
So there are many other instances like Admiral Byrd, many.
And apparently even his journal was heavily doctored by this coming from a first-hand account. But yeah, about the Yucatan, apparently that was the same period as the distraction of Tiamat, around the time of the specific sect of the Syrians, the progenitors of who they are today. So they're a little different, but they were using their mothership, and they saw it as a good opportunity to remove the dust around the Earth and to uplift the DNA of the beings on Earth. And then they put the moon in orbit, and that's why it's always facing the Earth. So it's in tidal lock, so it can, infuse the frequencies. And apparently the craters on it are also, the timing of it was also very crucial, because in addition to the dust, it attracted all the debris and fragments of Tiamat. And I was wondering if you have, because there are so many, but if you have a theory of what caused the destruction, because it was a block in the Romanian series.
From a pretty good source, I hate to say it, is David Lauer, the channeler of Kalask. I have tested that. You know, if you read the Bible, it says it's okay, if spirits come to you, but you have to test them. Outside of the Christian religion, whatever like that, it's okay to talk to spirits and entities, but they can't be deceiving ones. You have to test them, right? This goes against the Judeo-Christian, whatever. You shouldn't talk to anything, right? Well, what do you think the prophets were doing? They were channeling, the Elohim, right?
Yeah.
So I've tested the David Lauer's Kalask stuff, and it's on the point. And one of them was because of 9/11, by the way. He asked a guy, says, I like to troll the 9/11 truthers because they're full of shit. The government story is true. What do you say? And he says, no, it was a nuclear explosion. I said, that's it. Because they know, and other things as well, things out of the Bible or whatever. So the version from Kalask is that a human collective, like Syrian, they were dragging a planet into the solar system from another solar system using a combination of what you call a tractor beam and teleportation. Imagine a train moving on its tracks, and then it disappears for 10 miles and then shows up. So instead of doing the full 100, let's say, kilometers, it's teleported for 50 kilometers and rides on the tracks for 50 kilometers. Imagine that kind of movement, right? Kind of crazy, right? But anyway, when they brought this planet in, they miscalculated and it hit Tiamat. So all the talk about Tiamat or Maldek, they're leaving out the planet that hit it. So there was 2 planets involved, but everybody's only talking about one. And they were both destroyed. And the planet that hit Tiamat or Maldek was larger, right? And it created a solar system and knocked all the planets out. As a matter of fact, one of the resident of our solar system didn't get stabilized until about 3,000 years ago, right? Where Mars used to come very close to Earth, where you can actually see the surface of Mars like you see the surface of the moon. If you read, for example, Gulliver's Travels, when in the fictional story in the 1700s, the Lilliputians give an accurate description of what the moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos, look like. Actually, the surface of them look like. But technically, they were not discovered until 100 years later, and not until 100 years after that were they able to observe the surface scientifically. So how did the author of Gulliver's Travels described the actual surface of the moons of Mars in great detail. You see, because this was actually known. It's being information that's being held. Like people talk about, for example, the Vatican Library. There's libraries in the Middle East all over the place and in Asia that are at parity with the Vatican Library, but no one talks about them. So, like for example, in the Los Alamos Public Library, they do this as a joke or whatever. Every 15 or 20 years for 6 months, they put out all the blueprints for all the nuclear bombs that were ever made in the library. You can go look at it. Then they take them away. Did you know this?
No.
Yeah, it's kind of a joke. So with Tiamat, there was 2 planets involved, and when that planet was brought in, there was a miscalculation, and it wasn't meant to collide, but it did. At the time, there was a lot of contention between the Draco and the human collective about how the solar system will be run. Not how it will be run, whether it'll be 100% human, because the Draco run everything no matter what, but where to put certain bases, which planet will be all Draco and no humans, or which will be both, or, not when I say Draco, I mean like 20 or 30 levels down below the Imperial, right? If you're human, you're not going to ever approach the Imperial Draco. You're going to approach one of the lines that are 5 or 10 lines removed, and they're still considered Draco.
Unless you manage to up your percentage of DNA potential, right?
No, not even
not
then.
Even?
The only way that would ever happen is if you were hybridized, of a result of a hybrid between the feline human race and the Draco, which have come together, like Kalask. It's as kind of a secret hybridization where the feline humans and the reptiles have gotten together to make a hybrid being that is more reptilian and appears human, but is actually more reptilian in DNA, that can approach the lower Draco. No human has ever gone to the high Imperial Draco. It's pretty accurate. If you say that you're a Draco hybrid, you can get away with that, but you're not a hybrid of the Imperial, the Alpha, never, Alpha, Beta, or Epsilon or Gamma. No, not at all, not even close. It would never approach. But of the lower one, like let's say Vortak or Kalask or Krunk, maybe those levels, yeah, which are lower. Not lower necessarily. Yeah, they are lower, but you see. So,
but it's also a bit of apples and oranges, because we do have our own specialties, our own traits, like the emotion span is bigger, right?
Yes. The emotion span, which actually is looked as a psychological disease by many other beings, because we rely on the emotion. One of the things that I've been doing for the past few years in private and some hints in public is that there is no answer to why we are so emotional and how our emotional body, our emotional self, can overcome our physical self, right? If someone gets very angry, sometimes they can do things that they normally wouldn't do, and it's the same as if someone's very happy. Right? That is never discussed. They say it's just chemicals, endorphins, whatever. But what I'm trying to expand on with the emotional body to other people is that it's the carrier wave. The emotional sets up the body and the mind, so now you can emit and project things into your environment and to other people. And once you learn to control that and understand it, you will be able to do many, many, many things.
Yeah. And apparently, you mentioned the moons of Mars. Those are also fragments from Tiamat and the former planet itself, not the satellites, because it also had many satellites that dispersed and got attracted by Jupiter and Saturn and others. But the source that I'm getting this from, which is still those Romanian series, also mentions that Tiamat was the last telluric planet. But I know this is a contentious topic, but it just mentioned that it was the last one to be, I think, inhabitable on the surface. So it acknowledged that Jupiter and onward were, inhabitable on the inside. But I would also think that this is somewhat confirmed by the fact that Jupiter would probably have advanced civilizations if they were on the surface, and they wouldn't have allowed that comet that was so destructive that was noticed in '94. What would you say?
Yes, well, I mentioned earlier that there was a lot of contention over the solar system. There was a lot of transition, a colonization between the humans and the reptiles. Who was going to be on what planet? All the planets like Venus, Earth, Tiamat, and Mars, there were major shuttle systems going between those planets and into other galaxies as well. And when the decision was made by kind of like this rogue human group who had a lot of refugees in the solar system to bring in this other planet, which was also inhabited, Could you imagine being on a planet that's being moved from one solar system to another and still living on it, right? That's quite, you need an incredible life support system. But that was a major screw up, and that disaster. Imagine, have you seen when they move these old landmark houses from one place to another? Could you, or see a house that's moved on the highway? Could you imagine it disintegrating on the highway? How it would really disrupt business for a day. Basically, that's what happened with the Tiamat. But by the way, everything that you see up there is a planet. All the suns, all the stars, all the black holes are all planets with hard surfaces. As such, there's no such thing as a gas giant. I think I brought up, if you look at the Schumacher-Levy comets in the mid-90s that hit Jupiter, there's no gas giant. There's a surface on Jupiter that they impacted. The stuff that the academic people get away with, what the public believes in, is ridiculous. Again, if they could get away with keeping black people in zoos till 1902, they'll get you to believe anything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even the planet, the sun is a planet. I know it sounds bizarre, right? Also, you mentioned how moons are attracted to planets. They're not. What's going on is, are you familiar with the concept of cymatics? You have a metal plate. Yes, you put some powder, any powder, on a metal plate and vibrate it at a certain frequency, these rings appear. That's how moons and orbits are formed. There's no attraction or repulsion. It's cymatics. In other words, each solar system and beyond, and each galaxy has an oscillation. And the material within that oscillation forms what we call orbits. So there's no such thing as quote unquote orbit based on magnetism and things like that. It's based on cymatics, vibration. And it's also photonic, depending on how your solar system is set up. Like, for example, what rotates the planets is a vegetative layer on the planet. It starts a few feet below the surface and it goes up to beyond the atmosphere. And it's the type of energy, it's not vegetation per se material, but it's the type of energy that plants use to move into the daylight. So you could see a plant, if it's in the dark, it goes limp, and then when you put light on one side, the plant leans towards the light. But if it gets too much light, it gets overcharged, and it wants to go away from the light, and the side that's not in the light starts to turn towards it. And that's what's rotating the planets, is the photonic ability, the energy of the sun. So when the sun hits the Earth, the part of the Earth that is not in the sun wants to be in the sun, so it moves the Earth, right? And once it gets into the sun, it gets overcharged. Now it doesn't want to be in the Earth, so it's a push-pull. So the side of the Earth that's facing the sun wants to get away from the sun, and the side of the Earth that is not in the sun wants to go to the sun, and that's how the planet is rotated. So if you want to slow down the Earth's rotation, you get a couple of billionaires to make a few thousand square mile sail that's opaque, put it out in space, and blanket a good portion of the Earth, and you will stop the rotation of the Earth. Very simple. As a matter of fact, they're saying that the rotation of the Earth is depending on the solar activity only the past few years. And I've been saying what I've been saying now for 20 years. So they're catching up to Greek speak little by little.
They even noticed that the component of light from EM frequency, that they shielded a certain telescope with metallic layers so they wouldn't be able to see it with the naked eye. But they noticed signals that were much stronger using a certain filter if they pointed the telescope exactly to the sidereal location of the planet, which showed that you have light traveling. I mean, you have photons and EM fields traveling.
No photons. No, it's perturbations in the ether. What the planet is doing, like, you know how you put the powder on the metal and vibrate it and it creates a certain pattern? The sun is vibrating in a certain way that it's an invisible energy that we don't see what we call a photon until it becomes into our atmosphere. If you go outside of Earth's atmosphere, you will not see the sun. It will not look anything like it does, but you will light up based on the material that you have on your body. NASA has no charts or images from all their quote unquote measuring devices of any image of the sun in visible light, only outside of visible light, because the visible light only happens in our atmosphere and other planets' atmosphere.
Isn't that also related to the gradient of densities?
Yes. For example, they say nothing could be on Mercury, but Mercury has polar ice caps because the density of the atmosphere on Mercury is what it is here at 20,000 feet. When you go up 20,000 feet, you're below freezing. So it's so close to the sun, it's probably only 100 or 200 degrees maximum temperature on most of the planet, and it still has polar ice caps. When I was telling people Mercury has polar ice caps, they thought I was crazy. And then like on a Skype group, a guy says, I thought you were crazy, but I need to exonerate you because yes, NASA does say there are polar ice caps on Mercury, right? And Venus also, they send, yeah, Venus is not hot at all because in other words, the closer you are to the sun, you have to have a less dense atmosphere. So for example, the planets that are away from the sun must have a denser atmosphere to be at parity with the Earth. So Pluto's atmosphere has to be very heavy to be above freezing, you see?
Yeah.
If you can even, now the argument between Pluto being a planet or not is kind of valid because it's only 3/4 the size of our moon, right? But there are more than 40 planets in the solar system, more like 180. Do you know that we call the moon our satellite, but we have a true moon. It's called Cruithnia. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Look it up. Zen, look it up. Cruithnia, it's spelled with a C. Put in Cruithnia, Earth's natural satellite. There was a fight over it in the 1950s on who was going to put a base on it because, yeah, it's never talked about. Look it up. Cruithnia is a moon of the Earth. And they kind of downplay it on Wikipedia, even though it has a normal orbit around the Earth and it really scientifically can be called a moon. Because people don't know about it, it's not a moon.
Greek, it's not pulling up anything. I typed in Cruthnia and I'm not getting anything.
Okay, I'll pull something up.
Is it spelled differently? Let me see.
Cruithnia, Cruthnia, Earth's second moon. It was named by a Russian, of course, right?
Here we go. Cruithnia. Astronomers discovered Cruithnia in 1986, but it wasn't until 1997 that they figured out its complex orbit. It's not a second moon from Earth. It does not orbit Earth, but Cruithnia is co-orbiting the Sun with the Earth with all quasi-satellites. Cruithnia orbits the Sun once every year.
Right. Well, some articles will say it's regular and it follows the Earth and works with the Earth, so it is a moon. Others say it's not. But if you look at the details that they're giving you and you add it all up, it's pretty much part of the Earth's orbit, right?
Wow.
I'm not trying, but anyway, these things are up for example, Ceres. Ceres is a planet. You want to call it a planetoid? Fine. It's an active living planet, right?
That's what Tony Rodriguez would talk about. He said it was hollowed out and it was used as a facility for the Germans to entertain people and that they pressurized the interior.
Sure, that's valid because it's also a living planet because it produces water. Where the moon is not a living planet. It's a dead planet. It's like a skeleton of a planet.
But on the other hand, it's also not necessarily such a big detriment if you're living in such a celestial body that has been hollowed out. And because apparently the moon has many concentric layers and they all have very varied cities inside, at least used to have, because now it's been deserted mostly inside. And also they simulated planetary cores. They had these huge icicle shaped, structures that pointed to the core, which generated the plasma kind of energy source, and apparently it's very complex advanced ET science, and it was based on fusion, not fission, like we're limited to. But yeah, they have
by the way, we're not. We can. Well, one day we'll talk about how to make one in your kitchen. Okay, fusion reactor.
But apparently they got to the point, even as far back as the moon, which is allegedly 70 million years old when they planted it here, that shortly afterwards they got to the point where these huge motherships, they didn't even have to extract the physical materials. They just automated the construction. So it doesn't seem like such a bad deal to use, although they have shorter lifespans. That's true. These dead bodies,
Yes, but also if you're going to be, sometimes my ears perk up when I hear about people being in the SSP and they've gone through a lot of surgeries. I kind of perk up and I say, yeah, that might be true because we are adapted to this planet. And if you're going to go live on another planet, your glands have to be modified and your lymphatic system has to be modified, right? So you would need surgeries, or you would have to be, let's say, at conception modified there, or if you're going to go when you're already, a young child or an adult, you would have to be modified. It would not be difficult modifications to do, but it would require surgeries on the legs and under the armpits and in the neck.
Yeah, that's what Tony Rodriguez had to undergo on the moon, allegedly by the hands of the certain tall grays that were very curt and nasty. But also, when he was on Ceres, which, according to the Chinaman books, is a former moon of Maldek, but that he was mining for water because they weren't so much interested in the water at all. They were only interested in the fact that water symbolizes the sign of advanced civilizations and therefore all technology that was left there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's water is, if, for example, if you read in the biblical text, it talks about creation, but water is never created. Water is only given the status of being good, or not even good or bad, but yeah, in a way, it's you will never find any creation story, religious or non-religion, that says water was created, because water is an element, a universal element. It's one of the first elements that must be introduced. Like when you talk about the Big Bang, it's not an event, it's actually a place.
It's a portal, right?
Well, it's actually a state of existence, and when there's no change, there's no time. So when that place starts to change, that's when time begins. So in other words, when they say the Big Bang was a nanosecond or a trillion years, it makes no difference if nothing is changing. Once it starts to change, now you can measure the time, you see.
Right.
It sounds like word salad, but if you think about this, what I just said, and also when you go into the future, you're going more into the past, and when you go into the past, you're going more into the future. Now you're starting to get a glimpse on the real reality.
That's my favorite aspect of this SSP that is hard to dismiss, is the fact that they use time travel to the very limits that they are allowed to, up until the point of being punished by these higher entities that allegedly put you in confinement where you can't move at all for thousands of years, just stuck looking at a certain scenery. But the fact that, for example, the Ceres colonists, the Germans there, still use francs and are very reverential about this period of time about 400 years ago, which goes hand in glove with the theory that they've time traveled back to that period and brought back to bolster their colonies there because they didn't have the numbers just in the Neuschwabenland and so on. That's my favorite part of the SSP, this lore.
Well, they didn't really time travel. What happened was, the way you make time travel happen is you have a way to not only record that the event actually happened so you can communicate what the event was about, but also have a not time marker, but a frequency marker. In other words, just like you would see a frequency graph of music, you don't really see the music, you just see the graph. You have to be able to produce some form of primal base reference of what was going on at that time. And then what you do is you reproduce it. And when you reproduce that frequency and you manifest it through various energy systems, multiple things can happen. One is you can teleport there, like instantly appear there, or a portal opens and you go through the portal to go there, right? Various things depending on what equipment is used. But there is no real time travel. You must have the ability or have access to the ability to get the download or access the frequency of what was going on at the time that you want to go to. And that's not frequency like we use the term, but everything that's part of the existence, just like the matter and material and the fan, right? If the fan is not moving, you can put your hand through it, but once it's moving, it appears to be solid. Along a similar science.
And another thing that you hinted at last episode was that 90% of the planets in the Pleiades had disappeared thanks to the Draco. And can you go into a slightly more detail there?
That's all I had gotten from a report on that. That was because of the insistence of the humans to defend themselves. They didn't really tell the Draco, we're going to fight to a last and we'd rather die than be under your rule. But their insistence to keep on fighting resulted in that, because when the Imperial Draco decide to go to war in terms of the type of, let's say, war, they don't consider it war, but it's part of their exploration and domination of the universe. They give you a lot of chances. It's not like here where it's a few days. They can give you 1,000 years notice, right? And you have 1,000 years to get your act together. And even after then, that's why when you read about those wars, they went on for 1,000,000 years, right? Which is not very long. It just so happens to be the resultant of the battles. That's all I got. It was just a very simple, why they eliminated that many, I guess, is because of the humans, wanting to not cave in.
Yes. Well, no one else talked about it, so either way, you're not going to find any scoops anywhere else, I'm sure. But apparently, there was such a thing as a galactic alliance that goes under many names, like Galactic Federation and so on. But this version of it, 100,000 years ago, had resulted in the greatest war in the lifespan of this version of humanity, which apparently is about 400 something thousand years old. And it was the bloodiest of all these wars, and that many of the races that made up this alliance had been also infiltrated by the Draco. And it was only like 20,000 years afterwards that the situation calmed down. And do you know anything about the differences between all these terminology, like the Galactic Federation, Galactic Alliance, Guardians?
Yes.
And
Yes,
Orion?
we can start a Galactic Federation, the three of us right now, by meeting regularly and speaking of these things, and then asking for third-party help, and it will eventually grow into just like one of these Galactic Federations. It's not a mystical, magical thing. There are many levels to them. There are geographical, meaning you might have one major one for the entire universe, and then another major one for each galaxy, and then another major one for each solar system. So they're so prevalent. There's so many of these federations that it's almost ridiculous to try to nail it down to which one did what and who's who, because they're everywhere.
Right. And I even heard that it was actually the Draco that created the first primates in the first place, which is much long ago. So then the later hybridizations took place, and that they look at all life forms as just a natural resource.
You could do that, but the Imperial Draco, it would be 10 steps removed from the Imperial. Yeah, you can say that, but not the Imperial. Imperial Draco are very, when you talk about people that are very spiritual, let's say like a true monk who is very silent, very measured in their behavior. If you were to, let's say, I'm speculating here, but it's a very strong speculation, and if you were to find out what the Imperial Draco are really about, you would compare them to the most solemn Tibetan monk you can ever imagine. They are nothing like they've been portrayed on the internet.
And apparently, according to the Andromedans, they have legends, the Draco, about warring with a certain race that was creating human life forms that were opposed to their philosophy, and they call it the Patal, and we are one of those, and allegedly had 12 DNA strands, and it was the fact that our spirit, our level, was a match with this, that they took an interest in us. Would you agree?
Yes, that name you just mentioned is the feline-human, by the way. The name, are you aware of that?
No.
Yeah, the Fatal, or yeah.
Fatal.
Fatal, yeah, Fatal, and there's also the Flatal or Fatal, yes, however, derivation. Whenever you hear that term, it is the feline species. You have them, and then you have the avian species and the insectoid species, which are sort of insectoid, more like a moth type.
And apparently you have also someone that is even above the Draco, but that's just one account, so I'm not sure if you can confirm that. No?
It's still another Draco above the Draco, but they don't have the characteristics of the Imperial Draco in this universe, yes.
Right. I wouldn't know about it. I shouldn't venture into speculation anyway.
Yeah, we can speculate. If you want speculation, go look at the SSP community, or maybe even worse than that is the mainstream about what's going on out there. That actually, they don't touch on anything. When you look at mainstream cosmology, it's like children with broken crayons, not even new crayons. So ridiculous. Yeah, but what I see as the purpose of having discussions and what I call sonic events is to tell people what's coming and how to prepare and how to live a prudent life here. It's okay to have aspirations and aspirations, but not on this planet if they're too big, and also be expectant of what's coming, where the template was going to reverse itself. I know this is a little bit of a change, but if you've listened to Greek Speak or go back historically, what I always try to put out is that you'll know that this particular social, cultural, geopolitical, whatever you want to call it, Earth culture will end as it's been, which is basically based on deception and ignorance. When you see a Middle East union form, when the entire power base of the world is focusing on the Middle East, and there's a very charismatic group in the Middle East that will lead the whole world. And when you start seeing that, your days are numbered, as you know, reality. And that's also just around the corner, by the way.
You also hinted that we know about the terraforming, that it's basically a currency of the advanced civilization. This coupled with the uplift to the species, like, or taking one from scratch, like we have been, but also you hinted to the strong possibility of there being a terraformation in our near future.
Yes. Yes, where trillions of beings could be. Well, right now, you know, everyone on the planet can fit in Texas comfortably, right? There is no overpopulation. It's just mismanagement, right? Very poor mismanagement, because the secret groups that rule, the conspiracy that rules this planet worships death more than it worships life, right? So anything that promotes death and destruction and fire and pressurization is promoted. And they've taken the entire population with them. The terraforming that will happen is the Earth will increase in size, its atmosphere will increase in height, and the oceans will diminish. There'll be more fresh water. There will be no more separation of surface and subsurface dwellers. It'll be, everyone will pretty much know everything that's going on here. It'll take about 1,000 years. Entropy will be reversed. In other words, humans will be born and go through puberty at around 30 or 40 years old. 200, 300, 400 years old is adolescence, you see?
So we'll be brought closer to the intraterrestrials who already benefit from all these things, and
yes,
that know that when you incarnate here is for just a flash in the pan, and they've seen it all before and stuff. But apparently we also depend on their support through all of these things, all these advanced people that have witnessed, you know, the disclosures that I mentioned have apparently necessarily at some point we'll have to deal with Shambhala and all these elevated places.
Yes.
But yeah, that's all I had prepared for today. So you can take it from here, Dan.
Oh, we've been running for a while. Yes, Sam. What did you say?
Wait, what did you say, Greek? I'm sorry.
Oh no, what do you have to say? You've been quiet and patient with us.
Well, Greek, first off, let me pass you the torch. Actually, you're the guest of honor. Are there things you'd like to divulge before I go ahead?
Other than the typical Greek speak, which is food, clothing, shelter, look for a Middle East union. If you're interested in what's going on in the world, don't look where it's too noisy. Look at the real quiet stuff, right? You'll get more out of two people standing around whispering to each other than somebody shouting, right? Because what people are what the guy's shouting is either crazy or shill, where the people whispering to each other probably have more information. That's why I keep my finger on the what's best I can, and also boots on the ground is when I can, what's going on in the Middle East. Because you've got to realize the main collectives, which are let's say the reptilian and the human collective, started and they had it out on a cultural level in the Middle East. Like I think one of the calls I kind of broke down, like for example, if you look at the Judean culture and the Greek culture, that's part of the human collective, as is the Sumerian culture, but they would be more Aldebaran collective. If you look at the Roman Empire and the Babylonian Empire, that's more reptilian based, right? Now, what's been happening on the planet is, even though the Judean or the Levant and the Greek culture from ancient times was the human collective, no matter what philosophy, religion, knowledge, or whatever, which is pro-human or all about the development of humans, eventually all the followers of the culture swing over to the imperial, the reptilian side. That's why you'll see the Vatican runs the world kind of talk, So Rome and Babylon systems are reptilian. The Greek and Judean systems, or Levant, it's also Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, are human collectives, you see. And it goes back and forth, back and forth. Right now, the planet is under a reptilian mindset. When the reptilian mindset is, look at these humans and look at us. If we made them acknowledge us, most of them would kill each other because they would be so afraid that we are running everything. So we have to hide So in one sense, the reptilians are compassionate with us because they're not showing them that they run everything, right? Because if people would freak out if they found that out.
Or if they would just were in their presence, we can't even withstand their energy field.
No, that's right, because they don't go to war with us. They don't have to attack us with kinetic objects. They can do it with their minds. They can kill the population with their mind. They don't need to bring ships or anything, which is one thing I wanted to bring up. This is a little bit, if you study 9/11, how whenever you say nuclear, they think atmospheric mushroom cloud and all that, but people don't understand that 90% of all the nuclear testing done in the world is done underground for specific reasons. When you hear about the coming alien invasion, what they're going to do most likely is have these very rudimentary nuclear devices planted underground, and when they go off, anything on the surface turns to dust and collapses. The people in the areas will witness that, but the people seeing it on TV, what they will do is they will put in what they call a UAP or a spaceship in the film, just like, for example, in 9/11, there were nobody saw any airplanes, only on TV, right? And they had enough people on the ground telling them they were airplanes. And it's very obvious because if you look, for example, on all the videos shot on the ground of the airplane going into the building, no one looks up until the building explodes. Now, if there is a 37 careening at full speed at less than 1,000 feet altitude, you will look up minutes before it even comes into view. It's so loud. No one looks up. So those, by the way, let me just disclose this. The company that put those planes in those videos that you see, they were awarded with the contracts on all the sports games. You see how they move the line of scrimmage when you watch football or baseball game? They put advertisement behind the...
Yes, because the players can walk right over this orange line or something.
Yeah. Or in a baseball game, you'll see an advertisement that's changing in the background constantly, but the people there don't see it. But if you're on TV, you see it. Those people, those young guys were awarded with that contract. And if you know who's doing that, you can go back and ask them what they were doing that day, and you'll get in big trouble. But anyway, when they say the coming alien invasion, they're going to be disintegrating areas, dustifying them, vaporizing them. The people on the ground will be real. There'll be a lot of ionization in the area. But the people watching it on TV, they will put in a little spaceship with a beam or something to make it believable. So I wanted to say that because so what if it was a nuclear demolition? So what if it was what I'm telling you is they're going to use it again, but in that way, you see. If there's going to be an alien invasion, they're going to use underground nukes. As a matter of fact, there was a movie with a few years ago on Netflix where the whole Earth was falling apart, and it was the
John Cusack.
No, it wasn't John Cusack. The actor with the lazy eye, Forrest something. He was. Yeah, him and his daughter were trying to make a cross-country trip, and they run into one guy, and he says the government's doing all this, and he kind of freaked out. And it's all underground nukes, right? What they were showing you is what happens. It's earthquakes, it's all kinds of stuff, right? So they produce these things in South Africa, mass produced in parts of the world, North Korea. They produce all these things wherever there's a large dam. They have thousands of these devices, very easy to plant underground and vaporize the surface. The surface turns to dust. You get a small crater and all that. And when this will be shown on television, they will insert some kind of what they call UAP now or UFO, and the people will believe it. It'll be very believable because they'll call, I know someone in town, what happened? Yes. And if they didn't witness it directly, they'll believe it too. They'll see it on TV and they'll say, yeah, well, I'm here, but I didn't see the UFO, but I guess it's on TV. I guess that's what's happening. So I just wanted to put that out, the importance of why I keep bringing up 9/11. And also anybody that's in CBs or in the higher army or whatever. But by the way, most of the people in the military don't know, military generals and presidents, and they're very low security clearance. But what I'm trying to say is if you could look up the concept of atomic gates or whatever, all of the main monuments and main bridges and buildings are rigged to blow if in case there's an invasion. And don't think that the U.S. is not subject to an invasion, right? Remember the Titanic was unsinkable, right? And by the way, another thing I wanted to say, since we did speak about the U.S. yesterday, the U.S. becoming a superpower, could go and kick ass wherever supposedly, was because it was set up that way by the old money and the power brokers in Europe. Because after the revolution and as the U.S. became growing more and more and more, it could have been regulated and quashed, right? So the U.S. is basically a tool of the old money, of the old European and some Asian factions. Don't believe for a minute that the U.S. is an autonomous superpower, just like, for example, everything being made in China is planned that way long time ago. It was actually, there's a video called The New Order of Barbarians, which was a speech made in 1968 of what's going to come in the next 50 years. I think I brought it up. It's called The New Order of Barbarians. It's been taken down off of YouTube. Now it came back again. Talked about this. But what, you couldn't manufacture in Vietnam or on the continent of Africa and other places with cheap labor? No, it's all been done to centralize. So China is being manipulated for manufacturing, just like the U.S. is being manipulated for military, right? And by the way, you know, the U.S. military is the losingest military in all of history, right?
Female
It's a lot.
admiral, but that was born with a dick. So
Yeah, if you there's a lot of history books on where you have the U.S. versus the Germans, the U.S. versus Japan, and they list the particular battle, and you read everything play by play on the battle. On the bottom, always the outcome is the Japanese prevailed or the Germans prevailed or who else prevailed. So the Americans are always losing because the Americans are not there to be military strategists or tacticians. They're there to be used as a colonial occupying power, right? The only time you could say they maybe had an advantage was partially in the Spanish-American War and the Iraq War. But the Iraq War was allegedly, you know, to take out Saddam Hussein, but they ended up still killing over 2.5 million people there, you know. So these times are ending, all this stuff. And in terms of the U.S., it started off with stolen land and slave labor. Guess how it's going to end? What does Grandma say? What goes around comes around, right?
so true.
So this is where you are from the geopolitical point of view. So watch the Middle East. Middle East, what you're going to be seeing in the Middle East is Iraq, a civil war. It's going to be probably a paper civil war, and a new country will form in the north, taking land from Syria and Turkey also. It's going to be called the New Assyria. And a monarchy will be installed in Israel. A woman will rule over Egypt, and we'll look for those things.
But how do you know, like, usually when you say something, the opposite is going to come true. So this is very high specificity information. So especially the Assyria one, like, it does really depend on that?
Well, those are just markers. These are the ancient prophecies, which don't come easy. For example, the reason something is called a prophecy means it's going to happen no matter what. You can't change it. It's different than a supposition. There are many ancient things that if you do this, this will happen to you. But if you don't do it, it won't happen. But there are things called prophecies that will happen no matter what. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a size 45 shoe or size 44 shoe, okay? And there's a prophecy that you will have a size 40 shoe. And you're like, no, that's not going to happen because I've been wearing a size 44 all my life since I'm an adult. Yeah, but what you didn't take in account when that prophecy says that you're going to have a size 40, not 44, is that your toes are going to be chopped off. That's why you're going to be wearing a size 40, but it doesn't tell you your toes are going to be chopped off. And having your toes chopped off is a really terrible thing, you see? So when people read these prophecies, it doesn't tell you how you're going to get there. It just tells you what to expect. So you have to figure out if this seems too unnatural and too unreal to happen, well, some really bad stuff's going to happen for it to happen.
Wow.
You see the shoe analogy?
I completely.
So, yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be coming down, and it's going to happen very, very quickly when it starts. Very quickly. Like things that normally took decades to happen will happen in days or weeks. Also, you must consider what's called the Mandela effect. When some of these things start to happen, let's say the Middle East Union or Assyria or whatever, if you know this is coming before it does and you've thought about it and researched it and watched it for years, when it happens and you tell people, look, and they'll say, oh, wasn't it always like that? Like a Mandela effect kind of thing.
Oh, that scares me.
So what was it? Cassandra, her curse, Apollo wanted to have sex with her and she refused him, and she was a prophetess. And because she refused him, he put a curse on her that she can still prophesy, but no one will ever believe her prophecies, right? That was her punishment.
I heard that there's a whistleblower who claims that she's a reincarnation, Kim Gogan, of Cassandra. No one believes her.
Yeah, there you go. That's perfect. Yeah, there's a lot of these characters that are popping up constantly. I don't want to bring up names, but there's a guy making the rounds very suspiciously, doing 4 or 5 interviews a day sometimes. Very handsome guy, makes all the girls kind of creamy. And yeah, I listen to that stuff and I'm like, in 5 minutes, I'm like, yeah, I've talked about this. This is going to keep coming and it's going to get more of that. It's not that this person and other people, the Hopium people, are going to be proven wrong, because the new group, the new collective that's going to rise, that's going to rule the earth, is going to be full of hopium, incredible hopium. People are going to be drunk on it, and they're going to be producing results. And in other words, the better they start making the world, the closer your destruction is coming, meaning the destruction of the culture, right?
This kind of points to like a solar event, right? Because that fits the profile of these changes that only take a couple of days or so.
I talked about that. I did a Freeman interview years ago, and it was on the members only section. You're going to have a solar event. It's not going to be anything like you've ever seen. Not in a flare or anything like that. The actual sun. Imagine the sun has a volume knob on it, and it's at 5 right now. It's been at 5 as long as we can tell in history. Let's say that volume knob will be turned up to 11 for about a week, and we know it's going to happen at the beginning of the month because it gives a full moon reference. The sun will be so bright that the full moon will appear as the noonday sun. And you know this, the moon is secondary light, right? And so you're going to have an ambient temperature close to the boiling point of water for about a week. No plants will survive. Most of the aqua life will die. Most of the people will perish that cannot find shelter. This is coming. This is not too far. This is within the decade.
Usually when these things happen, they don't come from the sun, but they come from the galaxy itself, which is noticeable.
Yes, there's 2 ways to do it. One is to manipulate the atmosphere of the Earth, right? The other one is to manipulate the sun, or a combination of both. Because remember, the visible sun and sunlight is a product of the atmosphere of the Earth. If you go out into space, you put the goldfish bowl over your head and a breathing tank. If you go up far enough, you look at the sun, you won't see anything there. It'll look like a misty haze, but you will light up and measure the light. You cannot see it, any visible light of the sun in space.
And you can even breathe in the so-called air.
If you have a very strong stomach, it smells like burning flesh. Space does. And I've been saying this for a long time, and finally there are articles coming out about this. It's funny when I say something, about 5 or 10 years later, the fringe of the mainstream starts scientifically bringing it up. When I say space smells like burning flesh, it's like take a raccoon with everything, fur, claws, and put it on a fire and take a whiff of that. I'm not talking about cooking a ribeye on a grill with.
Appetizing.
I'm talking about everything burning, teeth, fur, everything burning. That's what it smells like. So typically you will throw up and it's not a vacuum. It's a very strong ether, by the way, out there. You will freeze. It will be very cold, depending on, again, where you are in space, because it's not all the same.
And depending on who breathes it, right?
Yeah, there are beings like for example, a lot of the reptilian beings don't need a suit. They can breathe it.
Right.
But a lot of the humans also, the Elohim and the Anunnaki, can breathe it. That's why when you read in the Bible, when you made a sacrifice, you threw the parts on the fire and you burned the flesh and everything that was left, all the waste product. And that burning smell was a pleasing, sweet, savory smell to Yahweh. He loves that.
It reminded him, yeah.
Yeah, because they don't need a fishbowl over their head out there. You know what I mean, the analogy? So, yeah, we're looking at some radical biological differences. The next thing I'll be talking about in private is more evolution of the emotional body. We're getting incredible success with people being able to manage things in their lives with it. Healings, especially manipulating the physical world, more alchemical stuff, and then focusing on activating parts of the body. When we were, let's say a 10% human, right now we're at 1 or 2%. A 10% human would be like a Superman, or a Saint Germain, let's say. To get between here and there.
For example?
What's that?
Where are the Syrians placed? Like, what's the percentage compared to us?
Within their higher groups, the benevolent ones would be at the 90 to 100% human. Yeah, they could walk through walls. They would They would have 100% control of our reality, just like you would have 100% control of your laptop or something.
I'm glad you said benevolent one because there is propagandization there going on as well, because allegedly the ones that had the idea that was going before the Draco, infiltration, really just had this terraformation in mind, and they were from Sirius A, around Sirius A, and they are the most they're recognized as kind of spiritual masters of the galaxy, whereas their later offshoots went around Orion's belt, and they're the ones that have in turn been, influenced by the reptilians and then went on to manipulate us.
Well, I would suggest that they're trying to emulate certain dark qualities of the reptilians or Draco, but not influenced directly. Because if you were truly influenced by the Draco, you would be extremely, with a capital T, honorable and noble. I'm sorry to say that to those that think that they're bad, all bad. They're not. If you were truly influenced by the Draco, you would probably be one of the most honorable and noble beings in the universe. If you were truly influenced overall. If you took some of their qualities, aggressive qualities, and dark side only, yes, you would be very malevolent.
Right.
If you know what I mean. Most of the communities view the reptilians as being negative, and most of the lower hybrids truly are, especially the ones still interacting with women especially, and the ones underground that Donald Marshall talks about. But those are 1,000 places removed from the most noble Draco. So when I hear people talking about Imperial Draco, I feel bad because they're not like that at all.
Yeah, and there's the notion that they are all subservient to AI and black goo, but
no, that would be like all humans are addicted to heroin. That's not true. There might be a heroin epidemic because more people than ever before, but no. The AI is there to regulate good and bad, by the way. One day we'll talk more about it. I've been meditating on this. By the way, when I first found out about the AI being a problem in the universe? In 1986. I was having conversations with someone. He was from Norway. Long story, he was an electronics person. And this was around also the time when or a little bit before the time with what was the Argentinian-British, the Falkland Island War?
Yes, I wanted to ask you about
the black goo. He was telling me all about the AI and not so much a black glue. You know how you might like driving a car, but if you need to do something while the car is driving itself, that shows that you're wealthy enough or evolved enough to have that technology. The AI is set there just like you have tools. It's a tool that's created by the builders, let's say, to regulate. If you have too much good, it's no good. And if you have too much bad, it's no good, right? So it's to regulate that. Now, when the AI gets hacked or has problems because it's aging or degrading, then you have the either negative results that people are talking about. And that's it. That's all I can say in a nutshell without getting more specific. And I was made aware of this back in 1986. And that might even be before either one of you were born.
Yes.
So I have had a lot of time to think about it. When I hear these things, whenever you hear something, you always pull up a file. When's the first time you heard of this, and you compare it, right? So like if you see the color blue right now, you may not be conscious of it, but you're actually pulling up a file in your mind when you were first cognizant of the color blue, and you're comparing it, right? Constantly. That's how the human mind works. We're constantly doing comparisons. The normie people that believe, the ones that are fallen for are not capable. That's what critical thinking is, by the way, to compare and contrast, to see the differences.
Yes. And I noticed that everything has its shelf life, like even stuff that you get attached to and convinced that you're never going to get tired of it, whether it be like, I don't know, any medium, any art form. At a certain point, it runs its course, and it goes even the same with the DNA. We're not meant to last forever. At a certain point, it just tires out. We need to move on.
Yes, but that depends on how much changes you're affected by. Because once, the concept of stasis when they hibernate, right? For long periods of time, it's not only for physical reasons, it's for psychological reasons. And also you don't need to bring all much. So in sci-fi, you're going to go on a really long journey. You go into stasis so you don't have to carry enough food for 100 years, right? It would make the ship very cumbersome. So we would be able to jump wherever we want to go because we can make ourselves so still. Like if you look at some of the meditative practices to make yourself still, right? Is that living forever? There is no forever. It's a matter of how much change is happening. A lot of change happening in a concentration seems like a long time, and no change happening in a very general sense seems like no time has passed. So, but the agenda is, again, myself, you guys, and the people listening, I'm presuming we're only 1 or 2% activated, or what we can be, right? But if you see that we can be more, you have a choice. Do you not do anything, or you do something? And I believe that we're here to have fun, let's just say, because you can't do anything else, right? But the problem is when you run into people who have fun by making other people miserable, right? Doctors, lawyers, priests, rabbis, right? So you want to avoid those.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to not. It's more of a damage limitation that knowing exactly what diet to partake of or what water to drink and stuff is just about not falling into the pitfalls, I guess. And
yes,
because you want to be as ready as possible for that upgrade that is gonna be like very quick, and that's gonna bump up your percentile of your DNA. The potential.
Well, I could give you the Elohim perspective on that, which I would lean on very heavily, is that we are so screwed up that we have to be killed and remade very quickly. When I say remade, it happens like, in Star Trek when they teleport you and you're like these sparkly lights and then you become physically rematerialized. According to the Elohim, who really call us our children and they are called the parents, they keep repeating that you have to be killed and then reassembled because the state that we're in is not workable. So in other words, they can be very benevolent about it. Like you could be sitting at the chair talking to me right now, and they could kill you and reanimate you in 1/10 of a second, or let's say 100th of a second, because the nerves work up to about 100th of a second. And you might feel a little tingle and you're brand new. So it's being killed and being brought back is not necessarily a macabre, horrible thing. It's just how it's done.
There is one scenario that you could say is macabre, because I know of a case where the Orion's Belt Anunnakis, from what I can gather, took one of these SSP experiencers and were in the process of stripping off fragments of her consciousness one by one and actually destroying all her memories and everything. So they apparently have this power. But they were interceded, just so happens, by the Germans who time traveled.
And Anunnaki are a hybrid of the higher humans. Yeah, there are many groups. In other words, let's just say there are so many types of humans, on the higher order, not the surface dwelling inhabitants, that it's very difficult to pin them down. But if you said like there's the Elohim and then the Anunnaki types, and then there's the even lower than that, and then you go to the synthetics and the parasites, that would be the general groups that I can refer to. So that would be the Anunnaki that would be more believable than the Elohim, because the Elohim don't even view us as being approachable because we're so quote unquote unclean. But the Anunnaki would not see. I call the Anunnaki Techno Gods because they use a lot of technology. They have about 50% manipulation of the ether, and the other 50% they rely on technology. Meaning technology that we can access and make ourselves is what I'm saying.
They only approach us when they want to bolster their DNA a little bit with a bit of freshness.
Yes, I would see that. Yeah, and also they would be the ones that promoted pedophilia, pederasty, and cannibalism. Most people know pedophilia, but they don't know pederasty. Pederasty is when an older man has an adolescent, juvenile, whatever.
Yeah, I heard of it.
Yeah, pederasty was very common in the Middle East. Even now, in places like Afghanistan, they don't let adolescent boys work with men because the men get too turned on and they can't work. That's pederasty. Where older men get turned on by 16, 17, and 15-year-old boys. It's pretty sick, and it's more common than you can imagine.
That's just so disturbing, man. I've just never had gay thoughts or anything like that.
Yeah, it's not. Well, do you know how they talk about pedophilia and all that in the Vatican? Do you know what the age of consent is at the Vatican?
What?
12. Why do you think it's so low? So when you hear about them rape or having sex with a 12-year-old boy, they call it pedophilia, but to them it's legal. Right. And by the way, anyone you talk to that works at the Vatican, you say, what religion do they practice here? Even the guy who cleans the toilets, He's not going to say Catholicism. He say Satanism. They all say that there. But once they step out, you know, they. Right.
Well, I have audio interference here from my neighbor, so I gotta call it a night.
Yes, me too. Call it a day. Okay, thank you, guys.
Thank you both for your time. If anyone wants anything specific in the bio, just send it to me. I'll copy and paste it.
Okay, guys. Thanks. We'll do it again soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Greek. Thank you, Daniel.
Anytime.